For 10 long years of marriage, my husband and I tried everything to have a child. I thought our shared heartbreak made our bond unbreakable. Then he showed up at my parents' house and proudly announced he was having twins with my own sister. I walked away without shedding a single tear and gave him exactly what he asked for in the divorce. He thought he had achieved the ultimate victory until his mother looked at him in absolute horror and asked the one question that would completely destroy his entire life. My name is Jasmine. I am 34 years old, and for a decade I played the role of the dutiful wife and the compliant daughter. As a financial risk analyst, I spent my days calculating probabilities for corporations. Yet I failed to predict the massive betrayal brewing inside my own family. I spent my entire life trying to earn the approval of my parents, Linda and Thomas. I also spent 10 years building a life with my husband, Jason. But in my family, there was only ever room for one star, and that was my 32-year-old sister, Brittany. It was a typical Sunday evening. The air in my parents' affluent suburban home smelled heavily of roasted chicken and vanilla candles. The dining room table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. I sat across from Jason, quietly moving food around my plate. Jason had been distant for weeks, claiming his tech startup was demanding his attention. I believed him because that is what a supportive partner does. Beside Jason sat Brittany, wearing a silk blouse that cost more than my first car. Brittany had always been the undisputed golden child. Growing up, she was the cheerleader who effortlessly charmed everyone. When she dropped out of 3 different college programs, my parents praised her free spirit and paid off her credit cards. When I graduated at the top of my university class with a degree in finance, my father merely nodded and told me not to let my career get in the way of finding a good husband. The double standard was a bitter pill I swallowed daily. The dinner conversation flowed around me, focusing entirely on Brittany and her recent vacation to Mexico. Linda hung on her every word while Thomas refilled her wine glass. I sat in silence, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. I glanced at Jason, hoping for a reassuring smile. Instead, his eyes were fixed entirely on my sister. I noticed a strange energy radiating between them. It was a subtle shift in their posture, a shared secret language of quick glances and hidden smiles. A cold knot began to form in my stomach. I am trained to spot anomalies, and the data in front of me was not adding up. As the plates were cleared for dessert, the atmosphere shifted. Brittany sat up unusually straight and cleared her throat with an exaggerated, delicate cough. She reached into her designer handbag resting on the floor beside her chair. The room fell silent. Even my mother stopped talking. Brittany pulled out a small rectangular object and placed it face down on the linen tablecloth. She looked at Jason, and a wide, triumphant smile spread across her face. "I have some really amazing news to share with everyone," Brittany announced. Her voice was breathy and filled with a theatrical excitement that made the hair on my arms stand up. She placed her manicured fingers on the object and slowly slid it across the table until it rested perfectly between my plate and Jason's plate. I looked down. It was a glossy medical photograph, a sonogram. The black and white image clearly showed 2 distinct shapes. My breath caught in my throat. For 10 years, Jason and I had spent thousands of dollars and shed countless tears over negative pregnancy tests. Seeing a sonogram on the table felt like a physical blow. I thought Brittany was announcing her own pregnancy with some random new boyfriend. I thought it was just another moment of her stealing the spotlight and unknowingly rubbing my painful infertility in my face. I opened my mouth to offer a polite and heavily forced congratulation, but Jason moved first. He did not look surprised. He did not look shocked or confused. Instead, he reached across the table and firmly grabbed Brittany's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. He looked up, not at me, but at my parents. "We are pregnant," Jason announced. His voice was loud and steady, ringing through the dining room with unmistakable pride. "We are having twins." The words hung in the air, suspended like shattered glass. "We are pregnant." He said we. He was holding her hand. My husband of 10 years was holding my sister's hand and announcing that they were having babies together. Time seemed to completely stop. The blood rushed in my ears, creating a deafening roar. I sat completely frozen in my chair. My mind scrambled to process the information. This had to be a sick joke. A horrible, cruel prank designed to get a reaction out of me. I looked at Jason, expecting him to laugh and say he was kidding. But his chin was raised in defiance, and he stared at me with a cold, hard expression that I had never seen before. I waited for the explosion. I waited for my father to stand up and throw Jason out of his house for disrespecting his marriage and his daughter. I waited for my mother to scream at Brittany for destroying her sister's life. I braced myself for the outrage that any normal family would display in the face of such a monstrous betrayal. Instead, my mother gasped and clapped her hands together in absolute delight. "Oh my goodness," Linda squealed, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "Twins! That is absolutely wonderful news. I am so happy for you both." Thomas immediately stood up from his chair. He walked over to the wooden cabinet and pulled out a fresh bottle of expensive champagne. "This calls for a toast," he declared, popping the cork with a loud bang that made me jump, "to the growing family." I watched in sheer horror as my father poured champagne into their glasses. My mother leaned across the table to squeeze Jason's shoulder, congratulating him on finally becoming a father. They were celebrating. My own parents were celebrating the fact that my husband had slept with my sister and got her pregnant. They acted as if this was a joyous milestone rather than the devastating destruction of my marriage and my entire life. The sheer absurdity of the situation broke through my paralysis. I pushed my chair back, making a loud scraping sound against the hardwood floor. Everyone stopped and looked at me as if I was the one ruining a lovely evening. "How can you do this?" I asked. My voice was surprisingly quiet, but it trembled with the weight of my shattered heart. I looked from Jason to Brittany and then to my parents. "How can you all sit here and celebrate this? He is my husband." Jason rolled his eyes with a heavy sigh. "Do not make this about you, Jasmine." My mother set her glass down hard. "Do not be so terribly selfish," she commanded coldly. "You are barren. Jason deserves a legacy, and Brittany is stepping up to give him the family you never could." Brittany dabbed at the corners of her eyes with her expensive linen napkin, carefully preserving her flawless makeup. She looked around the table with an expression of highly manufactured pity. "I know this is incredibly hard for you to hear, Jasmine," she murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "But Jason and I never planned for this to happen. It was not malicious. We were both just so profoundly devastated by your endless medical struggles. We spent hours talking late at night about how hard it was for him to constantly watch you go through all those failed fertility treatments year after year. We found comfort in each other's shared grief over your broken body. We were just trying to heal." My broken body. The horrific phrase hung in the dining room air, heavy and suffocating. She was actively painting herself as a selfless, angelic savior who had graciously stepped in to fix the immense tragedy of my infertility. "My father." Thomas cleared his throat aggressively, adjusting his posture to look more authoritative. He nodded in absolute agreement with Brittany, as if she had just delivered a perfectly logical business proposal. "Jasmine, you need to look at the bigger picture here," he said strictly. "We are a highly respected family in this exclusive community. We have a pristine reputation to maintain among our peers. Getting hysterical or causing a public scene will only create unnecessary gossip at the country club. I expect you to handle this gracefully like an adult. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. You need to accept this new reality quietly so we can protect the family image without any scandalous disruptions." Jason leaned back comfortably in his mahogany dining chair and crossed his arms confidently over his chest. He was wearing that familiar, arrogant smirk, the exact one he usually reserved for restaurant waiters who brought the wrong order or junior colleagues he deemed entirely beneath his intellect. He was eagerly waiting for my reaction. I could see the cruel anticipation burning brightly in his eyes. He fully expected me to break down into a sobbing mess right then and there. He wanted me to scream loudly and throw my crystal wine glass against the wall. He wanted me to fall to my knees and beg him to reconsider leaving me. When I remained completely silent and motionless, his smirk deepened into a dark scowl of pure condescension. Let us be brutally honest with ourselves for once, Jasmine, he began, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. This marriage has been completely dead for years. You are entirely obsessed with your little numbers job. You spend 10 agonizing hours a day calculating financial risk for faceless corporate entities while completely ignoring your own husband. I desperately needed a romantic partner who was actually present and emotionally available. I needed a real woman who could successfully build a family with me, not a cold, calculating machine who treats everyday life like an Excel spreadsheet. You drove me away, Jasmine. You pushed me right into her willing arms because you could not fulfill your most basic duties as a loving wife. He looked at Brittany with profound adoration before turning his cold, unforgiving gaze back to me. You really have no one to blame for this situation but yourself. The silence that immediately followed his callous speech was absolute and utterly deafening. My mother watched me with narrowed, judging eyes, silently daring me to misbehave and ruin her perfect evening. My father tightly gripped his expensive champagne flute, patiently waiting for the dramatic tantrum he was so absolutely certain would come. Brittany leaned heavily against Jason, playing the delicate, fragile victim who desperately needed fierce protection from her unstable older sister. But the copious tears they were all eagerly waiting for never arrived. The hysterical screaming they anticipated never materialized. Instead, I felt a strange and profoundly deep sense of mental clarity wash over my entire being. The paralyzing shock from just a few moments ago completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard logic. I was a professional risk analyst. My entire highly successful career was built on removing volatile human emotion from catastrophic situations and expertly executing the most strategic path forward to ensure ultimate victory. My training kicked in flawlessly. I looked down at my half-full glass of vintage red wine. I reached out smoothly, picking it up by the delicate crystal stem. I took a very slow, deliberate sip, savoring the rich, robust flavor, as if I were dining blissfully alone at a five-star luxury restaurant. I set the glass down gently, ensuring it did not make a single clinking sound against the polished wood table. I picked up my white cloth napkin and methodically dabbed the corners of my mouth. I placed the napkin neatly beside my plate. Then I pushed my heavy chair back and stood up perfectly straight. I smoothed the minor wrinkles from my pencil skirt, keeping my physical movements entirely relaxed and unhurried. The room was so incredibly quiet I could clearly hear the antique grandfather clock ticking rhythmically in the hallway outside. I looked directly into Jason's eyes. I did not blink or show a single ounce of fear. I will have my personal lawyer draft the final divorce papers by tomorrow morning. I stated, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any underlying emotion. I will make this incredibly easy and painless for you. You can have the primary suburban house. You can have the luxury cars. And you can keep the absolute entirety of our joint investment accounts. Consider it my very generous baby shower gift to you and my lovely sister. Jason stared at me blankly for a split second before a loud, barking laugh erupted from his chest. He threw his head back, highly amused by my surprisingly rapid surrender. He turned quickly to Brittany, squeezing her shoulder playfully. "I told you she would not fight," he bragged loudly, his voice echoing with extreme arrogant triumph. "She is entirely too weak and cowardly to handle a real legal battle against me. She knows she cannot possibly win against my high-powered attorneys." He looked back at me, shaking his head with a deeply mocking smile. "You are actually going to walk away right now and leave the vast bulk of our massive marital wealth sitting right on the table. Classic Jasmine. Always taking the pathetic path of least resistance. Send the papers over whenever you want, sweetheart. I will gladly sign them the very second they hit my desk." My mother let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, actively praising my sensible decision to avoid a messy public legal battle. My father nodded approvingly, clearly glad that the family wealth would remain safely intact and out of the public eye. I did not offer them another word. I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I grabbed my wool coat from the entryway closet and stepped out the front door into the freezing winter night. The cold air hit my face sharply, but it felt incredibly refreshing. I walked down the long paved driveway and climbed into the driver's seat of my sedan. I locked the doors and started the engine, letting the heater slowly warm the cabin. I did not drive away immediately. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my smartphone. I opened a highly secure encrypted folder application requiring facial recognition and a complex passcode. The screen illuminated the dark car, casting a pale blue glow across my face. I opened a specific digital document titled Project Phoenix Asset Reallocation. I scrolled through the pages of dense financial legalities and offshore holding transfers. A cold, genuine smile finally spread across my face. Jason thought he had just secured millions of dollars in highly profitable investments. He believed his superior intellect had completely outsmarted his boring numbers-obsessed wife. He was currently inside that warm house, celebrating his massive financial victory with my treacherous sister and my deceitful parents. But Jason had absolutely no idea that those joint accounts were nothing more than a ticking time bomb waiting to completely obliterate his entire existence. 2 days later, the heavy glass doors of my lawyer's downtown office swung open. The reception area was an intimidating display of modern wealth with polished concrete floors and minimalist leather furniture. I sat quietly waiting for the appointment to begin. My lawyer, Liam, sat beside me, reviewing the thick stack of documents we had painstakingly prepared over the last 48 hours. Liam was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who specialized in high-asset divorces and complex financial untanglings. I had retained his services months ago when I first noticed the glaring discrepancies in Jason's startup financials. The affair with my sister was just the final, unpredictable variable in a risk assessment model I had already run 1,000 times. The heavy doors swung open again, and Jason strolled into the reception area. He was not alone. Brittany clung tightly to his arm, wearing a fitted cashmere sweater that draped perfectly over her frame. She leaned her head against his shoulder, projecting an image of absolute devotion and delicate femininity. They moved together with a synchronized, arrogant swagger, clearly intending to inflict maximum emotional damage before we even stepped into the conference room. Jason wore a tailored navy suit, looking every bit the successful tech founder he desperately wanted the world to believe he was. He caught my eye and offered a tight, patronizing smile. Brittany simply looked away, playing the role of the conflict-avoidant peacemaker who was just helplessly swept up in a grand romance. Liam stood up and smoothly directed us into the primary conference room. The space was dominated by a massive marble table that overlooked the city skyline. Jason pulled out a chair for Brittany, ensuring she was comfortably seated before taking his own spot directly across from me. He brought his own lawyer, a junior associate from a flashy corporate firm who looked more accustomed to drafting press releases than navigating hostile asset divisions. Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the cold marble surface. He looked entirely too relaxed for a man dissolving a decade-long marriage. "Let us make this quick and painless, Jasmine," he began, his voice echoing loudly in the spacious room. "I am a very busy man, and Brittany has a prenatal appointment this afternoon that I absolutely cannot miss." I kept my face completely neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Jason took my silence as submission and continued with growing confidence. "I have outlined my terms, and I think you will find them incredibly fair given the circumstances. I will be keeping the primary suburban residence and the luxury vehicles. I am also taking full ownership of the joint investment portfolio. You can keep whatever paltry savings you have scraped together from your little personal consulting business. I will not touch your private checking account." His junior lawyer slid a bound folder across the marble table toward Liam. Jason was attempting to rewrite our entire financial history right in front of me. He genuinely believed his own fabricated narrative. For 10 years, I had quietly invested my substantial corporate bonuses to build a safety net, while he poured millions into a tech company that burned through capital faster than it generated revenue. Now he was trying to paint me as a dependent hobbyist. It is only fair, Jason insisted, gesturing broadly with his hands. I funded your little data-crunching hobby for 10 years while I built a real tech firm. I provided the roof over your head and the food on your table. Now that we are going our separate ways, it is legally and morally right that I retain the real assets I worked so hard to acquire. Twins are an enormous financial responsibility. Jasmine and I need to make sure Brittany and my children are completely taken care of. Brittany placed a manicured hand over her flat stomach and sighed softly. We just want what is best for the babies, Jasmine, she whispered, her voice trembling with fake sincerity. You have your career, and you only have to worry about yourself now. Jason and I are building a legacy. It would be incredibly selfish of you to try and take the money he needs to raise his own children. Mom and Dad entirely agree with us. They think you should just sign the papers and walk away gracefully so we can all start to heal. I let her words hang in the silent room. Liam adjusted his glasses and looked at me, waiting for my signal. I gave him a subtle nod. I am perfectly willing to walk away gracefully, I said, keeping my tone even and measured. I do not want the suburban house, and I have absolutely no interest in keeping those luxury cars. You can have the joint investment portfolio, Jason. I will happily take my personal savings and my consulting business just like you proposed. Jason's face instantly lit up with immense greedy satisfaction. He looked at his junior lawyer with a smug, victorious expression, clearly believing his aggressive alpha male routine had bullied me into complete submission. He actually thought I was stepping aside out of profound intimidation and lingering heartbreak. He reached for the silver pen sitting in the center of the table, eager to lock down his massive windfall before I could change my mind. However, I continued, raising my hand slightly to pause his celebration. There is one specific ironclad clause my lawyer has added to the final agreement. If you want the entirety of the joint investment portfolio, you must assume all attached responsibilities. The clause explicitly states that as the sole retaining owner of those specific accounts, you automatically assume all current and future liabilities, margin calls, and tax burdens tied to that portfolio effective immediately upon signing today. You take the assets, and you take the corresponding financial obligations. It is a completely standard clean break clause. Jason's junior lawyer frowned slightly, reaching out to pull the document closer. Perhaps we should take a moment to have a forensic accountant properly review the current standing of these specific margin accounts, he suggested hesitantly. It is always best practice to fully understand the exact liability ratios before assuming total ownership of a leveraged portfolio. Jason snatched the document away from his own legal counsel, waving off the valid concern with supreme arrogance. Do not be ridiculous, he snapped loudly. I know exactly what is in those accounts. I am the one who set up the primary trading strategies. I am not paying an accountant to tell me what I know about my own money. Jasmine is just trying to make this sound complicated so she can feel like she negotiated something important. She is just trying to save face in front of her expensive lawyer. Jason uncapped the silver pen. He did not read the fine print. He did not look at the attached appendices Liam had meticulously prepared. He was entirely blinded by his own insatiable greed and his desperate, overwhelming eagerness to finalize his brand new life with my sister. He wanted to walk out of this office, a wealthy, triumphant man with a beautiful, pregnant girlfriend on his arm. He leaned over the marble table and signed his name with a heavy, aggressive flourish at the bottom of every required page. He pushed the signed papers back across the polished marble surface toward Liam, offering me one last deeply arrogant and incredibly foolish smile. My lawyer, Liam, picked up the thick stack of freshly signed documents and tapped them neatly against the cool surface of the marble table. He announced loudly that he needed to make official certified copies for our strict legal records and quickly excused himself from the spacious conference room. The suffocating tension in the air immediately shifted the very moment the heavy door closed. Jason pulled out his expensive smartphone to check his new messages, completely ignoring my lingering presence across the table. He was already acting as though I was completely invisible to him and entirely irrelevant to his bright new future. I decided I desperately needed a brief moment to breathe and gather my scattered thoughts before we finalized the last official steps of the divorce. I pushed my chair back very carefully and quietly excused myself to use the private restroom located just down the hall. The law firm restroom was exactly what you would expect from a high-end corporate office located right in the bustling heart of the city. It featured luxurious floor-to-ceiling marble walls and heavy brushed gold fixtures that gleamed beautifully under the soft, elegant lighting. I walked over to the pristine porcelain sink and turned on the cold water, letting it splash loudly into the deep basin. I let the freezing water run over my wrists, taking a deep, calming breath to quickly steady my rapidly racing heartbeat. I looked directly at my own reflection in the wide, polished mirror spanning the entire length of the wall. I looked remarkably composed and entirely in control of my inner emotions despite the massive personal chaos unfolding all around me. I had just successfully handed my arrogant, cheating husband the exact rope he would unknowingly use to completely hang his own financial future. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door swung open behind me, completely interrupting my quiet moments of solitude. I watched carefully through the mirror as Brittany confidently walked right into the restroom. The exact moment the door clicked shut, perfectly sealing us inside the quiet room, her entire outward demeanor drastically changed. The incredibly sweet maternal fragility she had been actively projecting for the past hour completely vanished into thin air. Her narrow shoulders squared, and her posture straightened into a rigid stance of absolute defiance and open hostility. She immediately dropped the delicate victim act and replaced it with a dark look of pure, unadulterated venom. She walked slowly toward the sinks, her designer high heels clicking loudly and aggressively against the polished marble floor. She stopped at the sink right next to mine and began fixing her already flawless lipstick with practiced precision. We stood there side by side, staring at each other strictly through the clear reflection of the glass. For a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke a single word to break the incredibly heavy silence. The quiet stretched between us thick with years of unspoken resentment and deeply rooted, bitter rivalry. I simply reached for a fresh paper towel and began drying my hands methodically, refusing to engage first. "You know, Jasmine, you really did not have to make this so incredibly difficult," Brittany finally said. Her voice was no longer trembling or soft like it was when we were sitting in front of Jason. It was sharp and full of deep-seated sisterly resentment that she could no longer bother to hide. "You could have just signed the papers and walked away without trying to act like you actually won something in there. You always have to pretend you are the smartest person in the room, showing off for everyone." I tossed my damp paper towel into the brass bin and turned to face her directly. "I did not win anything today, Brittany. I just gave you exactly what you wanted handed to you on a silver platter. You can have him, and you can have the life you so desperately think he provides." Brittany let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed sharply off the cold tile walls. "Do you really think this is just about having Jason?" she asked, tilting her head in condescension. Her eyes narrowed as she crossed her arms tightly over her expensive designer cashmere sweater. "You are so incredibly naive, Jasmine, always missing the bigger picture. You have always been so utterly blind to how the real world actually works for people like us." I did not even want Jason at first. He is arrogant and completely obsessed with himself, always needing constant validation. I just wanted everything that automatically came attached with him. I wanted the luxury cars, the exotic vacations, and the massive overflowing investment accounts. I wanted the effortless, affluent lifestyle you always took for granted while you sat around complaining about your boring spreadsheets. She leaned closer to me, her voice dripping with toxic triumph and completely unfiltered malice. "You never deserved any of that money anyway," she continued, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "Mom and Dad always knew I was the one who was truly meant for high society. They knew I was the one who possessed the natural charm and exquisite beauty to truly thrive in those elite social circles. You were always just a boring, temporary placeholder holding Jason back from living a truly grand and exciting life. You sat at home crunching your pathetic little numbers while he desperately needed a woman who could properly elevate his social status. I stepped in because you were actively failing him on every conceivable level. You failed to give him the family he demanded, and you utterly failed to match his ambition. Mom and Dad agreed with me from the very beginning, supporting my choices behind your back. They encouraged me to pursue him because they knew I could give him exactly what he needed. You were just an inconvenient obstacle we finally managed to remove permanently. I stood perfectly still, letting her toxic words wash over me without absorbing her poison. She desperately wanted me to break down and cry. She wanted to see my face crumple in agony so she could validate her twisted choices. She wanted me to feel completely insignificant. But I did not flinch. I did not shed a tear or raise my voice in anger. I calmly turned back to the marble sink and examined my reflection one last time. I smoothed a stray lock of dark hair behind my ear, projecting total calm. I looked Brittany dead in the eye through the clear mirror. I hope Jason can truly afford your incredibly expensive tastes, Brittany, I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly pleasant. I hope he has the endless liquid capital required to keep you and our highly demanding parents satisfied. You should keep in mind that raising twins costs an absolute fortune these days. I hope you got exactly what you bargained for when you stole a man who measures human worth entirely by a bank account balance. Brittany scoffed loudly, tossing her head back with supreme, unwavering confidence. She genuinely believed she had just secured a lifetime of unlimited, effortless wealth and prestige. She thought she had won the ultimate prize and conquered her older sister. She gave me one final look of utter disgust before turning around and marching proudly out of the restroom, her heels clicking away in victory. She left me standing there alone in the quiet marble space, completely unaware of the financial execution I had just flawlessly orchestrated. Liam took the documents, meticulously checking every signature initial and date stamped across the heavy parchment. He gave a sharp professional nod, verifying that the legal trap was now officially sealed in ink. The divorce was finalized. The incredibly heavy burden of a 10-year marriage built on a foundation of shifting lies was finally lifted off my shoulders. I did not return Jason's deeply arrogant smile. I simply stood up, grabbed my heavy tailored designer trench coat from the back of my leather chair, and walked out of the conference room without a single backward glance. I left him sitting there basking in a monumental victory that was completely fabricated. Stepping out of the towering corporate building, I breathed in the crisp, refreshing city air. I hailed a private black car that was already waiting for me at the curb. The driver nodded respectfully as I slid into the quiet, temperature-controlled back seat. We drove just 15 minutes away from the law firm, heading deep into the heart of the downtown financial district. This was a completely different world from the quiet, predictable suburban neighborhood I had shared with Jason for a decade. The car pulled up to a towering luxury skyscraper made entirely of dark steel and reflective glass. This was not the modest, boring life Jason assumed I led. I swiped my secure key fob at the private elevator, letting it whisk me silently up to the top floor. The doors opened directly into my brand new home. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse with panoramic, unobstructed views of the entire city skyline. The interior was sleek and sophisticated, decorated with minimalist contemporary art and custom furniture that Jason would never have truly appreciated. He always preferred flashy, ostentatious displays of wealth, whereas I valued quiet, understated power. I took off my coat and walked over to the state-of-the-art kitchen, pouring myself a cup of freshly brewed dark roast coffee. The rich aroma filled the quiet, peaceful space. I carried the warm ceramic mug over to my expansive home office setup, situated right in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Three massive curved monitors dominated the sleek glass desk, displaying a constantly shifting array of live financial charts, global market indices, and highly secure offshore banking portals. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee, watching a specific red line on the central screen plunge sharply downward. That plummeting red line represented Jason's heavily leveraged tech startup. It was bleeding capital at a catastrophic, irreversible rate entirely due to a recent product failure that his monumental ego had caused him to ignore. Because of the ironclad liability clause he had just signed with such unbridled enthusiasm, every single margin call, outstanding loan, and toxic debt obligation connected to his sinking ship was now legally entirely his own. I had spent the last several months meticulously and perfectly legally liquidating my actual equity. I had funneled my true personal wealth into a highly protected offshore limited liability company months before his betrayal was ever brought to light. I was entirely insulated from the coming crash. I was completely safe, and I was incredibly wealthy. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair, feeling utterly unbothered by the chaotic end of my marriage. I had played the role of the quiet, dependable data analyst for a decade, allowing him to feel like the powerful provider. Now the curtain had permanently closed on that exhausting performance. Across town, in the quiet, manicured suburbs we used to share, Jason was busy finalizing his physical departure from our past. He walked through the empty master bedroom of the sprawling house he had fought so aggressively to keep in the settlement. He tossed the last of his expensive tailored suits and heavy designer watches into a large leather weekend bag. The house was quiet, echoing with the ghosts of a marriage he had effortlessly and callously thrown away. But Jason felt absolutely no remorse whatsoever. He zipped the bag shut with a loud, satisfying finality. He walked over to the window and looked down at the driveway. Brittany was waiting for him down there, sitting comfortably in the passenger seat of his luxury sports car. She was touching her slightly rounded stomach and smiling brightly at her reflection in the visor mirror, looking every bit the triumphant prize she believed herself to be. She was already mentally spending the millions she thought he had just secured for their growing family. Jason looked around the empty master bedroom one last time, feeling nothing but supreme, unmatched validation pulsing through his veins. He had successfully discarded his boring and fertile wife without losing a single dime. He had retained his massive, luxurious house, ensuring his social status remained perfectly intact. He had kept what he firmly believed was a multi-million-dollar joint investment portfolio, securing his financial future for decades to come. And above all else, he had secured a young, beautiful, fertile woman who was carrying the legacy he so desperately craved. He picked up his heavy leather bag and strode confidently down the wooden stairs, ready to claim his perfect, flawless new life. He stepped out the front door, locking it securely behind him, and tossed his bag carelessly into the trunk of his car. He was entirely convinced that he was the smartest man in the world, a visionary who had successfully engineered the ultimate life upgrade without suffering a single consequence. He slid into the driver's seat, leaning over the center console to give Brittany a passionate, celebratory kiss. He started the engine, the powerful roar of the expensive exhaust matching his inflated ego. He had one very important stop to make before they officially celebrated their brand new beginning. He simply needed to visit his mother, Martha. Martha was a sharp, fiercely intelligent, no-nonsense woman who had always deeply respected my intense work ethic and my quiet, unyielding integrity. She had never been fully convinced by Jason's flashy, erratic tech bro persona, and she had often subtly taken my side during minor family disagreements. Jason deeply resented that dynamic. He was absolutely desperate to prove her wrong today. He wanted to march right into her pristine traditional living room and proudly present his ultimate undeniable triumph. He wanted to show her the signed divorce papers and prove that he was a brilliant, unmatched financial strategist who had conquered his divorce with flying colors. More importantly, he was overflowing with arrogant eagerness to announce the pregnancy. He could not wait to watch his mother's face light up with pure joy when he told her that he was finally going to give her the precious twin grandchildren she had always wanted. He sped down the busy open highway, his hands gripping the expensive leather steering wheel tightly, completely high on his own manufactured success. He had absolutely no idea that the massive investment portfolio he was so immensely proud of was a sinking anchor tied securely around his neck. He had no idea that I was sitting in a downtown penthouse miles away, peacefully sipping my hot coffee and watching his financial destruction unfold in real time. The trap was set perfectly in place, the heavy steel doors locking silently around him without making a single solitary sound. He was driving blindly toward a brutal, devastating revelation, blissfully unaware that his entire carefully constructed universe was about to completely shatter into a million irreparable pieces. He pulled his luxury sports car into the sweeping driveway of his mother's elegant colonial home. Martha was a sharp, fiercely intelligent woman who commanded respect the second she walked into any room. She built her successful real estate portfolio after Jason's father passed away. Because she knew the value of a hard-earned dollar, she always respected me. Martha admired my intense work ethic, my quiet dignity, and unyielding integrity. She was never fully convinced by Jason's flashy tech bro persona. She often took my side during family disagreements, reminding Jason that a stable, loyal partner was worth far more than superficial status symbols. Jason deeply resented that dynamic. He parked the car and grabbed a bottle of scotch. He walked up the brick pathway and pushed the front door open without knocking, relying on the familiar privilege of being her only son. "Mother," he called out, his voice booming cheerfully through the entry hall. "Are you home? I have massive news to celebrate." Martha appeared from the formal sitting room holding a delicate antique teacup resting on a matching porcelain saucer. She wore a tailored beige cardigan and her silver hair was perfectly coiffed. She looked at him with mild surprise, her sharp eyes dropping to the bottle in his hand. "Jason, it is 2:00 in the afternoon," she said, her tone dry and disapproving. "What on earth are you doing bursting in here like you won the lottery? And where is Jasmine?" Jason let out a laugh, stepping fully into the sitting room and setting the bottle down on a side table. "Jasmine is not coming," he announced, a smug grin stretching across his face. "We just finalized the divorce an hour ago." Martha froze her teacup, halting halfway to her lips. She stared at him, her expression instantly hardening into a mask of deep maternal disappointment. "Divorce," she repeated, her voice dropping to a hushed tone. "Jason, what are you talking about? You and Jasmine have been married for 10 years. You do not just finalize a divorce on a random Tuesday afternoon without warning. What exactly have you done?" "I upgraded my entire life," Mother Jason declared proudly, completely misreading her horrified reaction as mere surprise. He poured a generous measure of the amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. "I finally ripped the Band-Aid off. I am completely free of that miserable, boring marriage. And the best part is that I walked away with absolutely everything. I kept the primary house. I kept the cars. I legally secured the entire joint investment portfolio. She signed it all away without putting up a single fight. I left her with nothing but her personal savings." Martha lowered her teacup back to its saucer with a sharp clinking sound. Her eyes narrowed and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You stripped your wife of her assets?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "A woman who stood by you while you built your company from nothing. You think bullying a loyal woman out of her rightful marital share makes you a successful man?" Jason waved his hand dismissively, entirely unfazed by her sharp criticism. "You never understood what that marriage was actually like for me," he complained, slipping effortlessly into the role of the long, suffering victim. "She was cold, Mother. She was a barren, calculating machine who cared more about her risk analysis spreadsheets than she did about providing me with a real family. I needed a woman who could actually match my ambition and elevate my social standing. I needed a woman who was not completely biologically broken." Martha gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. "Jason, that is an incredibly cruel and disgusting thing to say about the woman who loved you." Infertility is a medical tragedy, not a personal failing. How can you stand there in my house and speak about her with such venom? Because I finally found someone who can give me exactly what I deserve. Jason countered, his voice rising with defensive arrogance. I found someone who truly appreciates me. Someone young, beautiful, and full of vibrant life. And the best part, Mother, the part that is going to make you so incredibly happy, is that I am finally going to give you the legacy you have always wanted. Martha stared at him, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. Her sharp eyes darted across his flushed, excited face, trying to make sense of his erratic boasting. What are you rambling about now, Jason? Who is this other woman? Jason took another quick sip of his scotch, his chest puffing out with overwhelming masculine pride. It is Brittany, he announced, a massive triumphant smile taking over his face. Jasmine's sister. We have been seeing each other quietly for a while now. She understands me in a way Jasmine never could. And she is pregnant, Mother. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the massive revelation hang in the quiet, elegant sitting room. He waited for his mother to gasp in delight. He waited for her to drop her strict moral code and embrace him for finally securing the bloodline. We are having twins, he declared, his voice ringing with pure, unadulterated victory. I am going to be a father. I finally got the family I was always meant to have, and I secured the millions required to give them a perfect life. I won, Mother. I beat the system entirely. Jason stood there holding his crystal glass of expensive scotch, waiting eagerly for the warm maternal embrace and the tears of overwhelming joy he was absolutely certain would follow. He expected her to run forward and wrap her arms around his neck, thanking him for finally bringing grandchildren into their family. Instead, the silence that fell over the room was absolute and terrifying. It was not the stunned silence of happy disbelief. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a catastrophic realization. Martha did not smile. She did not step forward to hug her triumphant son. Her eyes widened to an unnatural size, entirely consumed by sudden, profound terror. The color drained completely from her elegant face, leaving her skin looking as pale and fragile as old parchment. Her hands began to tremble so violently that the delicate antique teacup and saucer she was holding rattled loudly against each other. She stared at Jason as if he had just transformed into a terrifying stranger right in front of her eyes. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She seemed completely unable to draw a single breath into her lungs. Mom, Jason asked, his arrogant smile faltering slightly as he noticed her alarming physical reaction. What is wrong with you? Did you not hear me? I said Brittany is pregnant with my twins. Martha's trembling hands finally gave out completely. The delicate antique porcelain slipped from her weak fingers. The teacup and saucer plummeted toward the floor, hitting the polished hardwood with a loud crash. The expensive china shattered instantly, sending sharp, jagged pieces in warm brown tea flying across the pristine rug. Jason jumped back, startled by the sudden loud noise. He looked down at the shattered mess on the floor and then back up at his mother, completely bewildered. Mom, what are you doing? He asked, setting his glass down quickly. You should be thrilled right now. Martha did not look down at the broken porcelain. She did not even seem to register the hot tea soaking into her shoes. She just kept staring directly at her son, her chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. Her eyes were filled with an absolute, unadulterated horror that Jason had never once seen in his entire life. Wait, she whispered, her voice cracking and trembling with a raw, devastating dread. She grabbed the edge of a heavy chair to keep her legs from collapsing underneath her. The room seemed to spin wildly out of control as she forced the terrible, suffocating words out of her throat. She did not tell you. For several agonizing seconds, Martha could not force another word past her lips. Her fingers remained locked around the carved edge of the chair, while her eyes moved slowly across the face of the son she had spent his entire life protecting from a truth she had once believed would destroy him. Jason watched her with growing impatience. The excitement that had filled him only moments earlier began to harden into irritation. He glanced toward the shattered porcelain scattered across the floor and then back at his mother. Martha barely noticed his expression. Her mind had already traveled 5 years into the past. She remembered the rainy afternoon Jasmine had arrived alone at the colonial house. Jasmine had been wearing a gray wool coat soaked at the shoulders, and she had carried a thick medical folder against her chest as if it weighed more than stone. Martha had known immediately that something was terribly wrong. Jasmine had not cried when Martha opened the door. She had simply asked whether they could speak somewhere private. They had sat together in the very same formal sitting room. Jasmine placed the folder on the coffee table, but kept one hand resting protectively over it. Jason refused to complete the fertility testing Jasmine had explained. Every time the clinic requested a sample or additional blood work, he became defensive. He insisted that because he looked healthy and had never suffered from any adult reproductive illness, the problem could not possibly be his. Jasmine had spent years accepting the blame. She endured invasive procedures, hormone injections, painful examinations, and repeated cycles of treatment, while Jason continued telling their families that her body was the reason they could not have children. Eventually, Jasmine requested access to his complete medical history. She had expected to find nothing more than an overlooked infection or a minor childhood surgery. Instead, the clinic uncovered the hospitalization report from when Jason was 14. The report documented a severe case of mumps complicated by bilateral orchitis. Several specialists had noted the likelihood of permanent infertility. A later evaluation had confirmed a complete absence of viable sperm. Martha had stared at those pages, knowing there was no longer any point in pretending she did not understand. The doctors told me when he was a teenager, she had finally admitted. They said the damage was almost certainly permanent. But Jason was already frightened and humiliated. His father had recently died, and he had become obsessed with proving that he was strong enough to take his place. I could not bring myself to tell him. Jasmine had looked at her without anger. That calmness had made Martha feel even more ashamed. "You let him believe I was the problem," Jasmine had said quietly. Martha tried to defend herself. She explained that she assumed Jason would eventually undergo testing as an adult. She believed the clinic would tell him privately and that he would have time to process the truth without feeling betrayed by his own mother. But Jason had refused every test. He had protected his pride by allowing Jasmine to carry the entire burden. Martha remembered reaching for Jasmine's hand across the coffee table. "You have to tell him," she had whispered. Jasmine had slowly closed the medical folder. "Not yet," she replied. "If I tell him now, he will hear it as an attack. He will think I am trying to humiliate him because the treatments failed. I will convince him to see another specialist. I will let the truth come from a doctor." Martha had asked why Jasmine was still protecting him after everything he had said. "Because I love him," Jasmine answered. "And because no person should have their deepest medical wound exposed during an argument." Over the following years, Jasmine continued trying to persuade Jason to complete the testing. Every attempt ended the same way. He accused her of shifting blame, complained that her career had made her emotionally cold, and demanded that she undergo another expensive treatment instead. Martha witnessed pieces of the cruelty, but never understood its full extent. Whenever she tried to defend Jasmine, Jason accused her of choosing his wife over her own son. Jasmine would quietly change the subject, determined to prevent the hidden diagnosis from becoming a weapon in a family fight. Now Martha stood surrounded by broken porcelain, staring at the man Jasmine had protected. He had repaid her silence by calling her barren. He had mocked her body, taken her assets, and abandoned her for her own sister. He was celebrating a pregnancy that could not possibly belong to him, while the woman who knew the truth had walked away without using it to destroy him. Martha felt sick. Jasmine had carried his shame for 5 years. She had accepted the judgment of both families and undergone treatment she never needed. She had given him countless opportunities to face the truth privately and with dignity. Jason had used every one of those opportunities to blame her more viciously. Martha straightened slowly, though her knees continued trembling. There was another reason Jasmine had asked her to remain silent. Jasmine feared that if Jason discovered the truth while his company was already under pressure, his unstable pride might push him into reckless decisions. She had hoped to wait until he was emotionally prepared and then reveal everything with the help of a medical counselor. Martha now understood that the silence had not protected him. It had only allowed his arrogance to grow without consequence. Jason took another step toward her. His polished shoe crushed a small piece of porcelain, producing a sharp cracking sound in the suffocating room. Martha looked directly into his eyes. She had promised Jasmine that she would never reveal the diagnosis merely to embarrass him. But that promise did not require her to stand quietly while he destroyed an innocent woman and claimed another man's children as proof of his superiority. The truth could no longer remain buried. Jason's jaw tightened as his remaining patience disappeared. "Tell me what," Jason demanded, his annoyance quickly overriding his initial alarm. He took a step toward his mother, his heavy shoes crunching against the broken porcelain. "Stop being so incredibly dramatic, Mom. Jasmine was supposed to tell me what?" Martha slowly shook her head, tears finally spilling over her pale eyelashes. "When you were 14 years old, you contracted a very severe case of the mumps," she explained, her voice barely a hollow whisper. "You were hospitalized for a week. The doctors pulled me into the hallway and explained the complications. They told me that the infection had caused severe bilateral orchitis. They were absolutely certain, Jason. They told me you were 100% sterile." Jason froze. A cold, suffocating weight dropped heavily into his stomach. "That is completely insane," he snapped, taking another aggressive step forward. "That is a ridiculous lie. Jasmine is the one who failed every single fertility test for the past decade." "She did not fail anything," Martha cried out, her voice breaking with profound maternal grief. "Jasmine found out the truth 5 years ago. She forced the fertility clinic to pull your childhood medical records because you arrogantly refused to get tested yourself. You have 0 sperm count, Jason. It is biologically impossible for you to ever father a child." The crystal tumbler slipped from Jason's hand. It hit the floor, joining the shattered teacup in a sparkling mess of expensive liquor and broken glass. His entire world simply stopped spinning. The air in the elegant sitting room suddenly felt far too thin to breathe. Jasmine had known for 5 years. She had quietly kept his devastating medical secret completely hidden, just to protect his fragile masculine ego. She had silently endured his constant cruel complaints about her broken body, while knowing the entire time that he was the one who was broken. And he had just brutally betrayed her for a pregnancy that could not possibly be his. A terrifying, blinding rage ignited deep inside his chest. He turned around without uttering a single word to his weeping mother. He stormed out of the house and sprinted down the brick pathway toward his luxury sports car. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slamming the heavy door shut with enough force to rattle the windows. He peeled out of the driveway, his tires tearing deep, angry gouges into the pristine gravel. He drove like an absolute madman, ignoring every speed limit and traffic signal as he sped recklessly across town toward his former in-laws' house. His mind raced with a chaotic storm of furious calculations. Brittany had played him. She had looked him dead in the eye and lied about carrying his children. He slammed his foot on the brake as he swerved violently into Linda and Thomas' wide suburban driveway. He did not bother turning off the engine. He kicked the car door open and marched up to the grand front entrance. He did not knock. He grabbed the heavy brass handle and shoved the door open with such immense violent force that it slammed loudly against the interior drywall, leaving a deep visible dent in the pristine white paint. Brittany Jason roared, his voice echoing furiously through the spacious foyer. Linda and Thomas rushed out of the formal dining room, their faces caught between outrage and deep confusion. Brittany appeared at the top of the grand staircase wearing a plush silk robe, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded stomach. She looked down at him, her initial annoyance quickly melting into genuine fear as she registered the sheer, unadulterated violence burning in his eyes. "Jason, what on earth is wrong with you?" Thomas demanded, stepping forward to physically block the pathway to the stairs. "You cannot just barge into our home and start screaming like a lunatic." Jason ignored him entirely. He locked his furious gaze on Brittany, who was now slowly descending the carpeted steps. He grabbed a tall, expensive ceramic vase from the entryway console table. He hurled it fiercely against the hardwood floor. It shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces, sending a loud, terrifying crack echoing through the large house. Brittany shrieked and jumped back, pressing herself tightly against the wooden banister. "Whose babies are they?" Jason screamed, his face flushing a dangerous dark red. He stepped over the broken ceramic shards, completely ignoring Linda's horrified gasp. "Do not even try to lie to me again, Brittany. My mother just told me everything. I know about the childhood medical records. I know about the mumps. I am completely sterile. It is biologically impossible for me to ever be a father. So I will ask you one more time. Whose babies are you carrying?" Brittany stared at him, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently against the wooden railing. The color drained completely from her beautiful face. She looked frantically toward her parents, desperately seeking some kind of rescue, but neither Linda nor Thomas offered a single word of defense. Cornered and entirely out of options, Brittany's delicate facade finally shattered. She collapsed onto the carpeted stairs, burying her face in her hands and breaking into loud, ugly sobs. "I do not know," she wailed hysterically, her voice muffled by her shaking hands. "It was a stupid mistake. I was seeing someone else right before we got together. I did not mean for any of this to happen. Jason, I swear, I just wanted to be with you, and when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked." The confession hung heavily in the tense, silent air. She had admitted it. The golden child, the beautiful, perfect sister, had completely fabricated the ultimate betrayal. Jason felt a sickening wave of pure disgust wash over him. He looked at Linda and Thomas, fully expecting them to erupt in righteous fury. He expected them to drag their deceitful daughter out of the house for destroying his marriage and humiliating their family. He waited for the profound apologies and the desperate pleas for his forgiveness. Instead, Linda stepped over the shattered vase and crossed her arms tightly over her chest. Her expression did not hold a single ounce of shame or horror. She looked at Jason with a cold, calculating hardness that made his blood run cold. "So what if they are not biologically yours?" Linda scoffed, her voice dripping with sharp, dismissive arrogance. She waved her hand casually in the air, as if a faked pregnancy was nothing more than a minor scheduling conflict. Jason stared at his former mother-in-law, completely paralyzed by her sheer audacity. "Are you actually insane?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, disbelieving whisper. "Your daughter just admitted to trapping me with another man's children to steal my money and destroy my decade-long marriage. Do not use that dramatic tone with me." "Jason," Linda snapped back, stepping aggressively into his personal space. "You have more than enough money to raise these children comfortably. Brittany needs a stable, wealthy provider right now. She is accustomed to a very specific high-class lifestyle, and you are going to give it to her. You already ruined Jasmine's life with your selfish behavior. The absolute least you can do now is take financial responsibility for your new family." Thomas stepped up beside his wife, nodding in firm agreement. "Linda is entirely right," he said, his tone strictly businesslike. "You signed the divorce papers today. You walked away with the massive joint investment portfolio and the primary estate. You have millions of dollars sitting in the bank, Jason." Brittany made a slight miscalculation, but she still chose you to be her partner. "You are going to step up and act like a real man. You are going to provide for my daughter and those babies regardless of whose DNA they share." The sheer depravity of their demands settled over Jason with a cold, suffocating weight. He looked from Linda to Thomas and finally to Brittany, waiting for even one of them to show genuine shame. None of them did. Linda remained rigid and defiant, as if forcing him to raise another man's children were a reasonable family arrangement. Thomas watched him with the detached expression of a businessman evaluating whether an investment could still be salvaged. Brittany sat on the carpeted steps with tears covering her face, but even her grief seemed focused entirely on what she was about to lose. Jason suddenly understood that the pregnancy had never been the complete plan. If Brittany merely needed a respectable father for her babies, her parents would not be demanding access to his investment portfolio with such urgency. Their desperation was too immediate and too financial. They were not only trying to preserve her reputation, they needed his money for something they had not yet revealed. Jason turned toward Thomas. "Why were you so certain I would pay for all of this?" he asked. "Why did the three of you decide that destroying my marriage was worth the risk?" Thomas's expression shifted for only a fraction of a second, but Jason saw it. It was fear. Linda quickly stepped between them. "You are emotional and confused," she said. "This is not the time to discuss private family finances." "Private family finances," Jason repeated. His voice became dangerously quiet. Brittany lifted her head from her hands. Her eyes darted toward her parents, silently asking whether she should speak. Linda gave her a warning look. That single exchange confirmed Jason's suspicion. There was another secret. He took a slow step backward, putting distance between himself and the three people standing together before him. "I do not know what kind of financial disaster you have created," he said, "but it is not becoming my responsibility. I will not sign another document, transfer another dollar, or accept another lie until I know exactly why you targeted me." Thomas attempted to recover his authority. "You are behaving like a child," he said sharply. "We can discuss a practical arrangement after everyone has calmed down." "There will be no arrangement," Jason replied. He looked at Brittany one final time. She was breathing rapidly now, her eyes wide with panic. For the first time since he entered the house, she did not look like a calculating socialite or a frightened pregnant woman. She looked like someone being pursued. Jason turned and walked toward the front door. He did not yet know who was chasing her or how much money she owed. But he knew Linda and Thomas were terrified of something far more dangerous than public embarrassment. The moment he stepped outside into the freezing air, he heard Brittany rushing after him. Jason took long, aggressive strides across the concrete driveway, the freezing night air biting sharply against his flushed skin. His hand was digging into his tailored suit pocket for his car keys when the heavy front door swung open again. Brittany came sprinting out into the bitter cold, completely barefoot, her plush silk robe billowing behind her. She was sobbing hysterically, her perfectly styled hair a tangled mess around her tear-stained face. "Jason, wait!" she screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet, affluent suburban street. "Please, just wait a second. You have to listen to me. I had no other choice." He did not stop walking. He reached his luxury sports car and grabbed the door handle, but Brittany threw herself violently against the side of the expensive vehicle. She pressed her back against the cold metal, blocking his entry and spreading her arms wide to physically trap him. Her chest heaved with frantic, panicked breaths. "Get out of my way, Brittany!" Jason snarled, his voice dropping to a dangerous, menacing growl. "I have absolutely nothing left to say to you or your psychotic parents. If you do not move right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." Linda and Thomas hurried out of the house right behind her, shivering in the freezing temperatures, but looking fiercely determined to corner him. "Jason, you are acting completely irrational right now," Linda called out, wrapping a thick wool shawl tightly around her shoulders. "You need to calm down and think about this like a businessman. We can come to a mutually beneficial financial arrangement that works for everyone. You do not want this massive scandal getting out any more than we do." "A mutually beneficial arrangement," Jason repeated, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated disbelief. "You people are absolute monsters. You actually think you can negotiate a price for destroying my entire life." Brittany slid down the side of the car, falling to her bare knees on the freezing concrete. She grabbed the edge of Jason's suit jacket, her knuckles turning white with absolute desperation. "You do not understand how much trouble I am in." "Jason," she sobbed wildly, her tears leaving dark, wet streaks on his trousers. "I owe so much money. I owe people who do not care about the law. They said they were going to hurt me if I did not pay them back by the end of the month. I had to find a way to get cash quickly." Jason stared down at her, his furious momentum pausing for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" he demanded harshly, yanking his jacket out of her frantic grip. "Who do you owe money to?" Brittany buried her face in her hands, shaking uncontrollably. "Loan sharks," she wept, her voice muffled by her trembling fingers. "Dangerous people from underground casinos." "I have a problem, Jason. a really bad gambling problem, and the shopping I could not stop buying things to keep up appearances at the country club. I borrowed cash from awful, dangerous men. I owe hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the interest keeps piling up every single day. They threatened to break my legs. They threatened to come after Mom and Dad. Thomas stepped forward, his face grim and deeply serious. She got herself into a catastrophic mess. He admitted, his tone entirely devoid of any parental warmth. The kind of mess that could completely destroy our family reputation and bankrupt us all. We needed a massive influx of cash to pay off those underground debts and keep the loan sharks away from our property. Jason felt a sickening wave of nausea wash over him. The horrific truth was finally pouring out into the freezing night air. This was never about love or shared grief. This was a highly calculated, targeted extortion plot. "You targeted me," he said, his voice hollow with shock. "You deliberately seduced me because you knew I had the money to bail you out of your psychotic gambling debts." Brittany looked up at him, her mascara smeared darkly down her pale cheeks. "You were so incredibly easy to manipulate," she confessed, her desperation giving way to a twisted, brutal honesty. "You were always complaining about Jasmine. You were always looking for someone to stroke your massive ego and tell you how brilliant you were. I knew exactly what buttons to push to make you feel like a real man. But then I found out I was pregnant." Jason felt his hands curl into tight fists at his sides. "And the father?" he asked, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Who is the actual father of those babies you tried to pass off as mine?" "It is Tyler," she wailed loudly, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. "My broke, deadbeat ex-boyfriend. He does not have a single dime to his name. He works part-time at a dive bar and lives in his friend's dirty basement. When I found out I was pregnant with his babies, I completely panicked. If the women at the country club found out I was carrying a broke loser's out-of-wedlock children, my social life would be entirely ruined. I would be a laughingstock. I needed a wealthy, respectable provider to claim the babies as his own before my pregnancy started to show. I needed someone rich enough to pay off the loan sharks and maintain my high society lifestyle." Linda stepped closer, her expression hardening into a mask of pure, calculated greed. "We saw the perfect opportunity, and we took it," she stated coldly, completely unashamed of her immense depravity. "Jasmine was never going to give you children, Jason. Her body was a broken, useless failure. We knew you were desperate for a legacy. Brittany needed a rich husband to save her from her debts, and you needed a fertile woman to give you the family you craved. It was a perfect exchange of services. If you had just accepted the babies as your own, you would have been completely happy. You would have had your perfect little family, and we would have had the financial security we require. We were actually doing you a massive favor." The sheer monumental scale of their sociopathic depravity crashed over Jason like a tidal wave of pure ice. They had looked at a decade-long marriage and seen nothing but a highly profitable business opportunity. They had viewed him as a gullible, pathetic mark, a walking bank account waiting to be drained. Jasmine had loved him unconditionally. Jasmine had quietly protected his deepest medical secret for 5 years, swallowing her own immense pain just to shield his fragile pride. And he had brutally discarded her for a family of parasitic leeches who viewed his massive wealth as a solution to their criminal gambling debts. "You are the most repulsive human beings I have ever met in my entire life," Jason shouted, his voice echoing violently through the quiet, affluent neighborhood. He looked down at Brittany, who was still kneeling pathetically on the freezing concrete. "You are officially evicted, Brittany. I am cutting all of you off immediately and leaving you with absolutely nothing." He turned his back on them, leaving them standing alone in the driveway. He marched to his car, completely ignoring Brittany's sudden, desperate wails begging him to stay. He slammed the heavy door shut, determined to use his vast wealth to bury them in endless legal fees. The freezing winter wind whipped against Jason's face as he marched down the long driveway. His entire body was vibrating with a chaotic mixture of pure adrenaline and absolute disgust. He reached his luxury sports car and threw the driver's side door open, collapsing heavily into the premium leather seat. He slammed the door shut, letting out a long, jagged breath. His hands were shaking violently as he gripped the steering wheel. Brittany and her greedy parents had completely underestimated him. They thought they could drain his bank accounts to pay off underground loan sharks. He was the one holding all the cards. He had walked away from the divorce settlement with the entirety of the massive joint investment portfolio. He was a multimillionaire, and he was going to make absolutely certain that they never saw a single penny of his hard-earned wealth. He reached into his tailored suit pocket and pulled out his smartphone, his thumb swiping rapidly across the glass screen. He needed to strike back immediately. He was going to freeze the joint investment portfolio, lock Jasmine out completely, just in case she tried anything, and then transfer the bulk of the funds into a private secure offshore account. He quickly opened his elite banking application, fully expecting to be greeted by the familiar comforting sight of an 8-figure balance glowing brightly in solid green numbers. The screen finally refreshed and the dashboard loaded. Jason immediately stopped breathing, rubbing his eyes, absolutely certain the application was experiencing a major glitch. He stared at the glowing digital screen, his heart suddenly hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. There were no comforting green numbers. Instead, the screen was completely dominated by a blazing, glaring wall of solid red. The total account balance was not just depleted, it was horrifyingly negative. He tapped the screen, frantically opening the detailed portfolio breakdown, his mind racing to comprehend the impossible data displayed right in front of his eyes. The massive investment accounts he had fought so aggressively to secure were not filled with stable liquid assets or high-performing blue-chip stocks. They were heavily leveraged margin accounts. He scrolled down the transaction history, his hands now trembling so severely he could barely hold the phone. Jasmine had methodically and entirely legally liquidated every single ounce of her actual equity. She had expertly drained the real value from the portfolio, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, incredibly toxic shell. But the nightmare did not end there. Jason dug deeper into the current asset allocations. The remaining leveraged funds were tied directly to the stock performance of his own tech startup. For the past 2 quarters, he had completely ignored a catastrophic product failure, choosing to focus on his own ego and his secret affair with Brittany. The market had finally caught up to his arrogance. The stock was currently tanking, plummeting at a disastrous, catastrophic rate. And because the joint portfolio was heavily margined against that exact collapsing stock, the accounts were instantly triggering massive automatic margin calls. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror crashed over him as a specific memory suddenly flashed through his mind. He remembered sitting in that pristine downtown law office just a few short hours ago. He remembered Jasmine's calm, even voice explaining the single ironclad clause her aggressive lawyer had added to the settlement. He remembered her explicitly stating that the sole retaining owner automatically assumed all current and future liabilities, margin calls, and tax burdens tied to the portfolio. He signed his name with a triumphant flourish, completely blinding himself with his own insatiable greed. Jason let out an agonizing gasp, dropping the phone into his lap as if it had physically burned him. He was entirely ruined. Jasmine had not just walked away from their marriage. She had surgically and flawlessly orchestrated his total financial execution. She had handed him a live grenade perfectly disguised as a victory trophy. He was instantly millions of dollars in crippling, unmanageable debt. He had no primary house because the mortgage was tied to the collapsing portfolio. He had no loyal wife to support him. He had absolutely no money left to his name. And he had just destroyed his entire life for a fake pregnancy orchestrated by a desperate gambling addict and her sociopathic parents. Panic completely took over his nervous system. He snatched his phone back up his fingers, fumbling clumsily across the keypad. He had to call Jasmine. He had to beg her to reconsider. He had to throw himself at her mercy and plead with her to undo the brutal financial trap she had sprung on him. He selected her contact name and pressed the call button, lifting the phone to his ear with a desperate shaking hand. He listened to the absolute dead silence on the line. It did not even ring. The call immediately disconnected, dropping him straight into an automated carrier message. She had blocked his number completely. He was entirely cut off from the only person who possessed the intelligence and the resources to save him from this catastrophic abyss. While Jason sat completely paralyzed in the driver's seat of his expensive car, slowly suffocating under the crushing weight of his newly acquired millions in debt, the heavy front door of the house swung open again. Linda Thomas and Brittany stepped out onto the freezing porch, wrapping their coats tightly around their shoulders. They had watched Jason storm out to his car, and they were now actively panicking over the sudden terrifying loss of their primary meal ticket. They watched his car idling in the driveway, unaware of the financial bloodbath occurring inside the cabin. "We cannot let him just walk away like this," Linda hissed, her voice tight with frantic desperation. "If he actually cuts us off, Brittany is going to be thrown to those loan sharks. We will lose absolutely everything." Brittany wiped her smeared makeup, staring at Jason's car with a dark, resentful glare. "He is furious right now," she sniffled, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "He is not going to listen to a single word I say. He is completely lost to us." "Then we go directly to the source," Thomas declared, his jaw set in a hard, determined line. "Jason is completely useless right now, but Jasmine still has her personal savings. She walked away from the divorce with a pristine consulting business, and she owes this family for the immense embarrassment she has caused." Linda nodded sharply, her eyes gleaming with toxic entitlement. "Exactly. She thinks she can just strut out of our lives and leave us to clean up this massive mess. She has always been weak when we apply enough pressure. We know exactly where her pathetic little data entry office is located downtown." The three of them huddled closer together in the bitter cold, their breath pluming in the dark air as they hastily formulated their next attack. They were entirely convinced that Jasmine was still the quiet, compliant daughter they had bullied for decades. They believed they could march right into her low-level corporate workplace, cause a massive public scene, and aggressively intimidate her into handing over her personal savings to bail out Brittany's dangerous underground debts. They turned and walked back inside, the warm house resolved to ambush her first thing Monday morning, completely unaware that they were marching blindly toward an absolute slaughter. Monday morning arrived with a bitter, biting chill that perfectly matched the incredibly dark mood settling over the four of them. Jason drove his luxury sports car in absolute furious silence, his knuckles completely white as he gripped the leather steering wheel. The heavy, sickening reality of his massive financial ruin had consumed his entire weekend, leaving him completely desperate and entirely out of options. He hated the three people sitting inside his car with a burning, fiery passion. Brittany sat in the passenger seat, nervously chewing on her perfectly manicured thumbnail, while Linda and Thomas occupied the back seats, radiating a toxic, overwhelming cloud of arrogant entitlement. They were a pathetic, unholy alliance, forged entirely out of pure, unadulterated greed and mutual desperation. Jason desperately needed Jasmine to renegotiate the brutal divorce settlement and unfreeze his plummeting leveraged accounts before the aggressive margin calls resulted in his total public bankruptcy. Brittany and her sociopathic parents desperately needed Jasmine's pristine personal savings to pay off the violent underground loan sharks before the end of the month. They had spent the entire weekend actively feeding off each other's frantic panic, mutually convincing themselves that Jasmine was still the exact same quiet, compliant woman they had successfully bullied and manipulated for the past 10 years. Jason pulled up to the curb outside a massive, gleaming corporate skyscraper constructed entirely of dark-tinted glass and polished steel. It was one of the most expensive, highly prestigious commercial buildings in the entire downtown district. Thomas let out a loud, dismissive scoff as he stepped out of the low sports car and aggressively adjusted his suit jacket. He looked up at the towering, impressive structure with a deep sneer of pure superiority wrinkling his face. Her little data entry company must rent a tiny, windowless basement office in a place like this, Thomas muttered, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. They probably cram 50 low-level employees into a single miserable cubicle farm just to afford the prestigious mailing address. Jason slammed his car door shut, not bothering to reply. He was far too consumed by his own rapidly spiraling panic to care about the specific architectural details of Jasmine's workplace. He just wanted his money back. The four of them marched aggressively together through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped into the massive, expansive main lobby. The interior was breathtakingly elegant, featuring pristine white marble floors, towering indoor water features, and sleek modern security barriers. A steady stream of sharply dressed, highly professional corporate employees moved efficiently through the massive, echoing space. Linda immediately threw her shoulders back and lifted her chin, projecting the deeply ingrained, arrogant authority of a wealthy suburban housewife who was entirely accustomed to screaming at teenage retail workers to get her way. She was completely determined to cause a massive, highly destructive public scene. She wanted to humiliate Jasmine in front of her peers and supervisors. She wanted to embarrass her so profoundly that she would immediately hand over the money just to make the screaming stop. They bypassed the formal security checkpoints and marched directly toward the primary reception desk. The desk was a massive curved slab of polished black granite manned by a young, impeccably dressed woman wearing a tailored navy blue blazer. She was quietly typing on a sleek computer monitor when the unholy alliance descended upon her like a pack of starving wolves. "Excuse me," Linda snapped loudly, slapping her heavy designer handbag down hard against the pristine granite surface. Her shrill, demanding voice immediately echoed through the quiet, elegant lobby, causing several passing corporate executives to turn their heads in mild surprise. "We are here to see Jasmine." The receptionist stopped typing and looked up, a polite, professional smile automatically forming on her face. "Good morning, ma'am," the receptionist said in a calm, even tone. "Do you have a scheduled appointment with her this morning?" Linda let out a harsh, barking laugh, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "I most certainly do not need a scheduled appointment to see my own daughter," she declared, her voice rising another highly disruptive octave. "We are her family, and this man standing right here is her husband. We have an incredibly urgent family emergency that requires her immediate attention. I need you to leave this desk right now and escort us directly down to her little cubicle." The receptionist blinked, her professional smile faltering slightly as she registered the sheer aggressive hostility radiating from the group. "I am very sorry, ma'am, but I cannot simply leave the front desk to escort visitors without prior authorization," she explained, maintaining her polite corporate composure. "If you can please provide me with your names, I would be more than happy to call up to her office and see if she is currently available to receive unexpected guests." Brittany stepped forward, slamming her hands down next to her mother's purse. "Listen to me, you little corporate drone," Brittany hissed, her face flushing an angry, blotchy red. "We do not have time for your pathetic bureaucratic procedures. I am in massive financial trouble and my sister has the money to fix it. You are going to take us to her desk right this second, or I swear I will start screaming so loud this entire building will grind to an absolute halt." Jason pushed his way to the front, his face twisted into a mask of pure, desperate rage. "Look at me," he demanded, pointing a shaking finger directly at the receptionist's face. "I am Jason. I am the CEO of a massive tech startup, and I am Jasmine's husband. She legally stole millions of dollars from my joint investment accounts on Friday afternoon, and she blocked my phone number. She is hiding in this building right now, trying to escape the massive legal consequences of her actions. If you do not take me to her supervisor immediately, I will personally ensure that you are fired before you even take your lunch break today." Thomas nodded aggressively in agreement, stepping up to flank Jason. "You are looking at a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit." Young Lady Thomas threatened, his voice booming across the polished marble lobby. "You are harboring a corporate thief. You march us down to her data entry department right now, or we will drag your name directly into the upcoming legal proceedings." The receptionist stared at the four of them in total silence. She did not cower. She did not reach for the silent panic button hidden beneath the granite desk. She did not apologize or beg for their patience. Instead, her eyes drifted from Linda's furious face to Jason's trembling finger, and finally, to Brittany's desperate stance. The polite, professional smile completely vanished from her face, replaced by a profound, unmistakable expression of pure confusion and absolute pity. She looked at them as if they were a group of delusional mental patients who had accidentally wandered away from a secure psychiatric facility. Her supervisor, Linda, demanded aggressively, slamming her fist against the polished desk. "I want to speak to whoever manages her miserable little cubicle. I want them brought down here right now. I am going to tell them exactly what kind of deceitful, manipulative woman they are employing. I am going to make absolutely certain she loses this pathetic job today." The receptionist looked at them with a mixture of confusion and pity, then calmly reached for the receiver and made a quick phone call. The receptionist placed the sleek phone receiver back onto its cradle with a quiet, decisive click. She looked up at the four furious individuals looming over her granite desk and offered a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Someone will be down to escort you shortly," she stated, her voice perfectly calm, despite the aggressive hostility radiating from Linda and Thomas. Linda let out a loud, triumphant scoff, turning to cast a smug, deeply satisfied look at her husband and Jason. "You see," she boasted, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "That is exactly how you handle these low-level corporate drones. You have to speak their language and show them who holds the real authority." She is probably calling the department manager right now to have Jasmine dragged out here and fired in front of the entire lobby. Jason nodded slowly, his racing heart finally beginning to settle into a steady rhythm of vindictive anticipation. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket, feeling a sudden surge of his old familiar arrogance returning. He had spent the entire weekend suffocating under the crushing weight of his massive financial ruin, but now he was finally taking back control. He was going to stand right here in this pristine marble lobby and watch his quiet, subservient ex-wife lose the only pathetic source of income she had left. He was going to break her down completely until she handed over the money to unfreeze his leveraged accounts. Brittany leaned heavily against the polished granite desk, rubbing her swollen stomach with a theatrical sigh. "I just hope this does not take too long," she whined, pouting at Jason. "My feet are absolutely killing me, and I need to sit down." Less than a minute later, a soft melodic chime echoed through the expansive lobby. A set of brushed steel elevator doors slid silently open, revealing not a flustered mid-level manager, but a team of 3 imposing security personnel. They were dressed in impeccably tailored dark suits with discreet communication earpieces resting securely in their ears. They moved with a silent, coordinated efficiency that immediately commanded absolute respect. The lead security officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, approached the group. He bypassed the reception desk entirely and stopped directly in front of Jason. "Mr. Jason and his guests," the officer stated, his voice deep and entirely devoid of emotion. "Please come with us. You are expected upstairs." Linda nudged Thomas proudly, her face lighting up with a malicious, greedy joy. "Oh, they are taking this straight to the upper management," she whispered loudly, completely failing to conceal her malicious excitement. "The executives probably want to personally apologize to us for employing such a deceitful, manipulative thief." Jason felt a brief flicker of confusion as the security team smoothly surrounded them, forming a tight professional escort that felt oddly restrictive. They were not led toward the standard banks of elevators used by the steady stream of morning commuters. Instead, the lead officer guided them down a quiet private corridor lined with expensive modern art and stopped in front of a single isolated elevator. He retrieved a sleek black keycard from his suit pocket and tapped it against a hidden scanner. The heavy steel doors opened to reveal a private cabin lined with polished mahogany and mirrored glass. The 4 of them stepped inside, followed closely by 2 of the silent security officers. The doors closed, sealing them in a quiet, pristine isolation. Jason watched the digital floor indicator above the door, fully expecting it to drop down into the basement levels. Instead, the glowing white numbers began to climb rapidly. 10, 20, 30. The elevator moved with a smooth, breathtaking speed, propelling them higher and higher into the towering glass skyscraper. 40, 50, 60. Jason felt his ears pop from the rapid change in altitude. A sudden cold knot of unease began to form deep in the pit of his stomach. "Where exactly are we going now?" Jason demanded, turning to look at the security officer standing silently by the door. I thought her data entry department was located on the ground floor. The officer did not answer. He simply stared straight ahead, his face an unreadable mask of professional stoicism. The digital numbers finally slowed as they reached the absolute highest level of the massive building. 75. The elevator glided to a gentle stop, and the heavy steel doors slid silently open. The unholy alliance stepped out, and they immediately froze, completely paralyzed by the sheer, breathtaking opulence of their new surroundings. They were standing in a massive sunlit reception area, featuring pristine white marble floors and towering floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying panoramic view of the entire downtown city skyline. This was not a miserable windowless cubicle farm or a dark, cramped administrative basement. This was the absolute pinnacle of corporate wealth and elite executive power. The conditioned air smelled faintly of very expensive leather and fresh-cut orchids. Linda stared at the sprawling, elegant space, her jaw dropping open in profound confusion. Thomas blinked rapidly, entirely losing his aggressive businesslike posture as he took in the expensive, original artwork hanging on the walls. Brittany clutched Jason's arm, her previous complaints completely forgotten, as she stared in wide-eyed disbelief at a massive, cascading indoor waterfall. Jason felt the cold knot in his stomach twist into a heavy, sickening dread. Nothing about this situation made logical sense at all. The lead security officer gestured toward a pair of massive double doors at the far end of the quiet, carpeted hallway. "Right this way, please," the officer instructed, leading them forward. Jason's heavy shoes felt like lead weights as he walked down the corridor. His mind raced frantically, struggling to comprehend how his ex-wife could possibly be summoned to the most prestigious executive floor in the building. The officer stopped in front of the imposing mahogany doors, grasped the heavy brass handles, and pushed them wide open. The executive boardroom was magnificent. It was a vast, cavernous space dominated by a massive custom-built glass conference table that gleamed under the soft, recessed lighting. A wall of windows provided an uninterrupted view of the city below, making the room feel like a fortress suspended high above the clouds. But it was not the breathtaking view or the expensive furnishings that caused the air to completely vanish from Jason's lungs. It was the woman sitting flawlessly at the absolute head of the massive glass table. Jasmine. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored designer suit that radiated a fierce, untouchable authority. Her dark hair was styled in a sleek, professional cut, and her posture was straight, confident, and utterly commanding. Flanking her on either side of the long table were several high-powered corporate attorneys. Jason immediately recognized one of the men sitting directly to her right. It was Liam, the aggressive, high-priced divorce attorney who had orchestrated his complete financial ruin. Jason stood frozen in the doorway, unable to take a single step forward. The blood rushed loudly in his ears, completely drowning out the ambient hum of the corporate building. Linda, Thomas, and Brittany crowded in behind him, their arrogance completely evaporating. Jasmine folded her hands, resting them on the glass. "Good morning, Jason," Jasmine stated, her voice echoing with calm, lethal precision. "Welcome to Aegis Financial Analytics. I am the founder and CEO." The family stood completely paralyzed. Jason broke the silence. Sweat broke out across his forehead under the recessed lighting. His chest heaved as his mind scrambled to process the power shift that had occurred. He took a step forward, pointing a finger across the glass table. "This is a sham," Jason sputtered, his voice rising. "You set me up. You hid your assets and orchestrated a financial fraud to bankrupt me. I am going to sue you for every penny. I am calling my lawyers, and we are going to drag you into federal court." Jasmine did not flinch. She did not blink. She sat perfectly still, her expression radiating a terrifying, absolute calm. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the polished glass table, signaling the man seated to her right. Liam, the high-powered divorce attorney, offered Jason a tight, entirely humorless smile. He reached down to his premium leather briefcase resting on the carpeted floor. and produced a thick stack of pristine legal documents. With a smooth, practiced motion, Liam slid the heavy stack of papers directly across the long expanse of the glass table. The papers glided effortlessly, stopping right at Jason's fingertips. "There is no fraud here," Liam stated calmly. "What you are experiencing is the result of several agreements you signed long before the divorce." He opened the first folder and removed a document bearing Jason's signature from 7 years earlier. "When Jasmine began building Aegis Financial Analytics through her private consulting work, you demanded that her company remain legally separated from your technology startup. You were afraid that if her small business failed, its creditors might pursue the assets connected to your firm." Jason stared at the document without reaching for it. Liam continued, "You insisted on a spousal property waiver and a mutual indemnification agreement. That document classified Aegis, its intellectual property, its client contracts, and all future earnings derived from those contracts as Jasmine's separate business property." A flicker of recognition crossed Jason's face. Years earlier, Jasmine's consulting operation had consisted of a laptop, a rented office, and a handful of corporate clients. Jason had considered it insignificant. He had signed the waiver because he believed he was protecting his future technology empire from her supposedly minor enterprise. He had never imagined that the minor enterprise would become one of the most respected financial risk firms in the city. Liam slid a second document across the table. "You renewed that agreement 3 years later when Aegis secured its first institutional clients. Your signature appears on every page. You also acknowledged in writing that you had received independent legal advice." Jason's breathing became shallow. That company should still have been disclosed during the divorce, he argued. "It was disclosed," Liam replied. He opened another binder and pointed toward a numbered schedule attached to the mediation documents. "Aegis appears here under separate business interests. Your own attorney received the valuation, the ownership history, and the signed marital waiver. He advised you to commission an independent review." Liam turned toward the junior lawyer who had accompanied Jason to the divorce meeting. The young attorney lowered his eyes. Liam produced a printed email. "Your counsel warned you that Jasmine's company might be worth considerably more than you assumed. He also warned you that the joint investment portfolio contained leveraged positions tied to the performance of your startup." Jason looked at his former attorney in disbelief. "You replied to that warning with 6 words," Liam continued. "I know where the real money is." The sentence remained visible at the top of the printed email. Jasmine had not concealed Aegis. Jason had dismissed it. Liam placed 3 additional notices beside the email. These were the margin warnings issued during the month before mediation. This was the lender's notice explaining that the suburban residence had been pledged as secondary collateral. And this was the vehicle financing agreement containing an acceleration clause triggered by the collapse of your company's stock. Jason's eyes moved rapidly across the documents. The house, the cars, and the portfolio had appeared to be symbols of wealth. In reality, they were bound together by layers of loans, collateral agreements, and leveraged obligations. "You demanded every one of those assets," Liam said. "Your attorney asked for time to examine them. You refused. Jasmine offered to divide the portfolio after a forensic valuation. You accused her of delaying the divorce and insisted on taking complete ownership immediately." Liam leaned back in his chair. "Aegis did not bankrupt you. Jasmine did not manufacture the failure of your product, falsify your company reports, or force you to borrow against an unstable stock position. Those decisions were yours." Jason gripped the edge of the glass table. "Then why did she let me take everything?" "Because you repeatedly stated that those were the assets you created and deserved," Liam answered. "Jasmine agreed to your exact proposal. She retained the business that your own legal agreement identified as hers, and you retained the property and investment accounts you publicly claimed were yours." Liam turned one final document toward Jason. "This is the acknowledgement you signed immediately before the settlement was executed. It states that you understood the portfolio could contain substantial liabilities and that you declined additional valuation against the advice of counsel." Jason saw his signature at the bottom. The flourish he had written so proudly now looked like evidence left at a crime scene. Liam's expression remained professional. No one hid the truth from you, Jason. You were warned repeatedly. You simply believed you were too intelligent to listen. The blood completely drained from Jason's face, leaving him a pale, sickly shade of gray. His legs suddenly gave out beneath him, and he collapsed heavily into one of the plush leather chairs surrounding the conference table. He buried his sweating face in his trembling hands, finally realizing the absolute finality of his total ruin. He had handed Jasmine the legal weapon she needed to destroy him, and he had practically begged her to pull the trigger. Linda watched Jason collapse and a fresh wave of panic seized her. She aggressively pushed past Thomas and slammed her hands down on the glass table, glaring desperately at her daughter. "Jasmine, this has gone far enough," Linda demanded, her shrill voice breaking the quiet professionalism of the room. "You have had your little revenge against your husband, but we are your family. You need to stop this nonsense immediately and hand over your personal savings. Brittany is in massive trouble with very dangerous people, and we are about to lose everything." Jasmine slowly turned her head to look directly at her mother. The deep, profound sadness that had defined her eyes for the past decade was completely gone, replaced by a sharp, chilling emptiness. "You are right, Mother," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Brittany is indeed in massive trouble. But you and Dad are actually in far worse trouble." Thomas frowned, stepping up beside his wife. "What exactly are you talking about, Jasmine?" he demanded, trying to project an authority he clearly no longer possessed. "Our finances are perfectly stable." Jasmine let out a short, hollow laugh. "Your reputation is a fragile house of cards built on lies," Jasmine countered sharply. "You constantly brag about your beautiful country club mansion. But I know the truth. I know you secretly took out a massive second mortgage on your estate to fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle and quietly pay off her dangerous gambling debts." Linda gasped loudly, taking a rapid step back as if physically struck. "How could you know about that?" Linda whispered. Jasmine folded her hands. "Because my firm specializes in acquiring distressed assets," Jasmine explained with lethal clarity. "Aegis Financial Analytics recently purchased the exact secondary mortgage tied directly to your country club mansion. I am now your primary debt holder. I technically hold the keys to your front door." Thomas grabbed a leather chair, his knuckles turning white. "You bought our mortgage," he choked out. "You cannot do this, Jasmine. We gave you life." "You gave me conditional love and psychological abuse," Jasmine corrected. "So here is your only option. You have exactly 30 seconds to leave this building quietly. If you ever attempt to contact me again, I will immediately initiate foreclosure proceedings on your house today. And as for you, Jason," she shifted her cold gaze to her ex-husband, "if you do not leave right now, I will forward a dossier detailing your shady margin trading directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission." The absolute finality of her ultimatum hung heavily in the freezing air of the boardroom. Jasmine held total power. Linda let out a broken sob, grabbing Thomas by the arm and dragging him toward the mahogany doors. Jason stumbled out of his chair, hurrying out of the room completely broken and entirely defeated. The elite corporate security team silently escorted the group to the private elevator. They were pushed out through the heavy glass doors onto the freezing sidewalk. Jason sprinted toward his car, desperate to escape. Linda and Thomas stood shivering, their world shattered. "We are going to lose everything," Linda wailed. Brittany wrapped her expensive coat tightly around her pregnant stomach. She watched her parents fall apart, but instead of despair, a twisted spark of profound delusion ignited in her eyes. "Stop crying, Mom," Brittany snapped, fully detached from reality. "We just need a new plan. I am going to throw a massive high society baby shower next month. We will pretend everything is fine." Kevin Sterling, the wealthy real estate developer, recently finalized his divorce. "If I invite him, I can lock him down as a new investor before I start showing." Linda slowly nodded, her toxic ambition flaring up. "Yes, we will throw the biggest shower this city has ever seen." 4 weeks passed. Brittany exhausted the last shreds of credit to order premium invitations. Miles away in her pristine downtown penthouse, Jasmine sat sipping green tea. She pulled a small stack of mail toward her. Hidden near the bottom was a thick envelope featuring elaborate gold embossed lettering. Due to a careless automated mailing list error, Jasmine's name had accidentally remained on the registry. Jasmine stared at the elegant invitation, a slow, chilling smile spreading across her lips. Her eyes narrowed dangerously as she calculated the sheer chaotic potential. She set her teacup down. She was definitely going to attend it. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung inward. Jasmine stepped into the warm golden light of the chandeliers. She did not look like a broken woman or a discarded wife. She radiated the calm and untouchable power of a woman who owned the entire building. She paused at the entrance, allowing her dark eyes to sweep across the opulent display. She took in the ice sculptures shaped like swans. She watched the champagne flowing freely into crystal flutes. She noted the towering centerpieces of imported white orchids sitting on every table. It was a breathtaking illusion paid for entirely with leveraged credit and hollow promises. A string quartet played a soft classical melody masking the desperate energy beneath the surface of the lavish party. Jasmine handed her coat to a passing attendant with a polite nod and began to walk slowly into the crowded room. Guests parted naturally as she moved through the space drawn by her quiet, unmistakable authority. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a silver tray, scanning the elite faces of society. It did not take long to locate her family. Brittany was stationed near the center of the room. She was draped in an expensive silk maternity gown designed to accentuate her increasingly visible pregnancy. She was laughing loudly, resting one hand protectively over her stomach while holding a glass of sparkling cider. Standing directly beside her, nodding with polite but guarded interest, was a tall, sharply dressed man holding a highball glass. Kevin. He was the wealthy bachelor Brittany had targeted as her next financial host. Linda hovered just behind them, smiling so widely her face looked physically strained. She was eagerly interjecting whenever the conversation seemed to lull, trying desperately to make her daughter appear charming. Thomas was nowhere to be seen, hiding to avoid maintaining this charade. Jasmine took a sip of her water and adjusted her grip on the wrapped gift box. She took one confident step toward the trio, her shoe clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Linda saw her first. The older woman froze, her eyes widening in horror as the color drained from her face. She grabbed Brittany's arm in a panicked grip. Brittany let out a sharp gasp, her smile dropping as she followed her mother's terrified gaze. For a fleeting second, panic flashed across Brittany's contoured face. She knew exactly what Jasmine was capable of doing. The absolute last thing she needed was her wealthy sister destroying her crafted narrative right in front of her prime target. Linda leaned in, whispering something frantic into Brittany's ear. Brittany forced a tight, unnatural smile and excused herself from Kevin, leaving the bachelor standing alone. The two women marched quickly across the ballroom, attempting to intercept Jasmine before she could get near him. They cornered her near a display of baby gifts. Linda stepped in front of Jasmine, acting as a barricade. Her voice dropped to a desperate hiss. "What in the world are you doing here, Jasmine? You were absolutely not invited to this event. You need to turn around and walk right back out those doors this second before you cause a scene." Jasmine simply smiled, her expression serene and unbothered. She reached into her clutch and held up the gold-embossed invitation. The cardstock caught the light of the chandeliers. "But Mother, I received this invitation in the mail just last week. It requested my presence to celebrate this joyous occasion. I would never dream of missing such a monumental family milestone." Brittany's face twisted with venom. "That was a mailing list mistake, and you know it. You do not belong here. This is an exclusive event for society, not for bitter ex-wives who want to ruin everyone else's happiness. Leave right now before I call security and have you physically removed." Jasmine let out a laugh that sent a shiver down her mother's spine. "Security," Jasmine repeated with deep amusement. "I doubt the security team would remove me, Mother. After all, Aegis Financial Analytics holds the primary debt on this country club. I could have the general manager clear this ballroom in 5 minutes if I desired. But do not worry, I am not here to cause a scene. I am simply here to deliver a gift and enjoy the ambiance you have created with your credit cards. Linda glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening to their conversation. Her hands were shaking as she gripped her purse. Jasmine, please, Linda begged, her voice losing its edge. Do not do this to us. Brittany is so close to securing Kevin. He is very interested in her. If you ruin this for her, she will have nothing left. The loan sharks are already calling our home phone. We are out of options. You have your revenge against Jason. You ruined him. Just let your sister have this one victory so we can all survive. Jasmine tilted her head, studying her mother with detachment. You still do not understand, do you, Mother? This is not about revenge. This is about accountability. You built a life celebrating Brittany's lies while punishing my honesty. You threw me away the second you thought Jason had money, and now you are begging me for mercy to protect another lie. She turned her gaze toward her younger sister. Brittany took a step back, wrapping her arms around her fake stomach. You are a fraud, Brittany. Jasmine stated, her voice low and lethal. You are standing in a room full of people who have money pretending to be a mother-to-be. But beneath that dress, your entire story is empty. You have no money, you have no husband, and the twins you are carrying do not belong to Jason. Brittany flushed red, her eyes darting toward Kevin, who was now looking in their direction with an expression. Keep your voice down, Brittany hissed. If Kevin hears you, he will leave. He wants a stable family. He wants to take care of me. He wants an illusion, Jasmine corrected. And illusions shatter when the light hits them. Jasmine took a step forward, closing the distance between them. She held out the gift box. I brought this for the babies. It is a family tradition to give gifts, is it not? Take it, Brittany. Open it. Linda reached out, trying to swat the box away, but Jasmine stepped out of reach. Open the box, Brittany, or I will walk right over to Kevin and explain exactly why Jason is currently facing bankruptcy charges and why you are hunting for a new financial host before the end of the month. Brittany swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she reached out and took the box. She fumbled with the ribbon, tearing the paper with movements. She pulled off the lid and stared down at the contents. The color vanished from her face. She let out a gasp and dropped the box onto the marble floor as if it had burned her skin. The box struck the marble floor with a hollow thud. The lid rolled several feet away and stopped beside the leg of a gift table. There were no medical records inside. There were no photographs, debt statements, or public accusations. Resting against a layer of white tissue paper were two small silver identification bracelets engraved Baby A and Baby B. Beneath them was a prepaid appointment confirmation from a private maternal medicine clinic. Kevin bent down and retrieved the document before Linda could reach it. His eyes moved across the printed page. Non-invasive prenatal paternity screening, he read aloud. A subtle change passed through the guests standing nearest to them. Several conversations stopped. The string quartet continued playing, but the elegant music now felt strangely disconnected from the tension forming in the center of the ballroom. Brittany rushed forward and attempted to take the appointment confirmation from Kevin. That is private, she snapped. Jasmine has no right to interfere in my medical care. Kevin held the paper out of her reach. Why would your sister purchase a paternity test? Jasmine calmly picked up one of the silver bracelets. Because truth should be the first gift any child receives, she said. Linda stepped between them. This is harassment, she announced loudly. Jasmine is a bitter former wife who cannot accept that Jason moved on and started the family she was unable to give him. Several guests nodded uncertainly. Linda seized upon their hesitation. She has been obsessed with destroying us since the divorce, Linda continued. She purchased our mortgage, threatened our home, and has now invaded a private family celebration to humiliate a pregnant woman. Jasmine remained completely still. Then Brittany should have no reason to fear a simple test, she replied. Brittany pressed both hands over her stomach. I am not risking my babies to satisfy your jealousy. The physician named on that appointment specializes in a blood-based screening that presents no physical risk to the pregnancy, Jasmine said. The laboratory requires only a maternal blood sample and a cheek swab from the alleged father. Kevin looked at Brittany. Then take the test. Brittany's lips parted, but no answer came. The guests closest to the confrontation began moving nearer. They were still pretending not to stare yet. The widening circle around Jasmine and Brittany made their interest unmistakable. Linda grabbed Kevin's arm. You should not allow a vindictive woman to manipulate you, she said. Jason already accepted the children. That is all that matters. Kevin slowly removed her hand. You told me Jason was the biological father, he said to Brittany. He is, Brittany answered too quickly. Then why are you refusing to prove it? Because he is away on international business, Brittany insisted. He cannot attend some ridiculous appointment Jasmine arranged without his permission. Jasmine tilted her head. Jason is not away on international business. The room became quieter. Brittany's eyes narrowed. You do not know where he is. I know that his company entered emergency restructuring proceedings last week, Jasmine said. I also know that he has been living in his mother's basement since creditors seized his corporate assets. A shocked murmur passed through the nearby guests. Linda's face turned bright red. That is a malicious lie. Jasmine looked toward the ballroom entrance. Then call him. Put him on speaker and ask him to confirm your story in front of everyone. Brittany reached into her clutch but did not remove her phone. Her hand remained frozen inside the bag. Kevin watched her carefully. You told me your husband was negotiating an overseas acquisition, he said. He is under stress, Brittany replied. Jasmine ruined his company and forced him into hiding. He cannot speak publicly because of the legal proceedings, so he is not overseas. Brittany swallowed. That is not the point. It is exactly the point Kevin said. Thomas appeared from behind a row of flower arrangements. He had spent most of the evening avoiding direct questions about the family's finances, but the growing crowd forced him into the confrontation. This conversation is over, he declared. Jasmine, leave the property immediately. Jasmine turned toward him. Have you paid the remaining balance for this event? Thomas froze. The question seemed unrelated, but Linda's sudden expression of panic revealed otherwise. A nervous event coordinator standing near the wall lowered her eyes toward the tablet in her hands. Jasmine noticed. The orchid champagne and ballroom were secured with a deposit, she continued. The final payment was scheduled to process this afternoon, but the credit facility attached to your account was suspended after the foreclosure notice. Guests began looking around at the extravagant decorations with new suspicion. Thomas moved closer to Jasmine. Our financial arrangements are none of your concern. They became my concern when Aegis acquired the defaulted debt attached to the property you used as collateral, Jasmine replied. Kevin lowered the appointment paper. Brittany, are your parents losing their home? Brittany's breathing accelerated. They are temporarily reorganizing their assets. Are you married to Jason? We are building a family together. That was not my question. Brittany looked toward Linda silently, begging her to intervene. Linda faced Kevin with a strained smile. Legal paperwork takes time. They consider themselves married in every way that matters. Kevin stepped backward. You told me there had already been a private ceremony. Brittany's practiced confidence began to collapse. It was symbolic, she whispered. The murmurs around them intensified. One guest mentioned that no wedding announcement had appeared in the society pages. Another quietly asked why Jason's name was missing from the invitation. A third woman pointed out that Brittany had introduced herself using her maiden name earlier in the evening. The elegant illusion was developing visible cracks, but it had not yet shattered. Jasmine did not expose the medical records. She did not mention Tyler or the gambling syndicates. She simply allowed Brittany to continue answering questions. Every new answer contradicted the one before it. Brittany claimed Jason was overseas, then admitted he was facing legal problems locally. She claimed they were married, then described the ceremony as symbolic. She claimed her parents were financially secure, yet the event coordinator continued watching Thomas with growing concern. Kevin placed the appointment confirmation on the gift table. I came here because you told me you wanted advice about investing in a family-oriented business, he said. Now it sounds as though you invited me because your family needs money. That is not true, Brittany protested. Then what investment were you planning to discuss? Brittany opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Linda stepped forward and raised her voice. This entire interrogation is inappropriate. Everyone should return to the celebration. But no one moved. The string quartet had quietly stopped playing. The musicians sat with their instruments lowered, watching the confrontation along with everyone else. Jasmine's phone vibrated inside her clutch. She removed it and looked at the screen. The message contained only 3 words. The package has arrived. Jasmine locked the phone and returned it to her bag. Brittany noticed the change in her expression. What package, she asked. Jasmine glanced toward the ballroom doors. The evidence you were hoping would never reach this room. Brittany staggered backward. Her hands instinctively covered her pregnant stomach as fear replaced every trace of arrogance. Linda reached for Jasmine's arm. Whatever you think you have, she whispered. We can make an arrangement. Jasmine calmly removed her mother's hand. You had 10 years to treat me like a daughter, she said. You chose to treat me like an obstacle instead. A movement near the entrance drew the attention of the entire ballroom. The heavy double doors at the far end swung open once again. A uniformed event attendant walked in, carrying a beautifully wrapped oversized box, topped with a massive silver bow. He carried it directly to Jasmine, who then turned and carried the heavy package straight toward her trembling sister. Brittany took a frantic step backward, her expensive silk maternity gown swishing loudly against the polished marble floor. What is that? She stammered, her voice cracking with pure panic. I told you I do not want anything from you. Jasmine held the oversized box out, offering it like a peace offering laced with venom. I forgot to give you the main gift, Brittany Jasmine stated, her voice projecting clearly across the entirely silent ballroom. The first box was merely a small token, but this one is the true celebration of your upcoming motherhood. You really need to open it. Brittany shook her head violently, refusing to reach out. Kevin, the wealthy bachelor, suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed with sharp, intense suspicion. He looked at Brittany, and then down at the massive silver bow. Open the box, Brittany. Kevin commanded, his tone stripped of all the polite charm he had displayed earlier. If you have absolutely nothing to hide, then open it right now and prove your sister wrong. Forced into a corner by the expectant judging stares of the high society friends and the direct demand from her prime financial target, Brittany had no choice. Her hands were shaking violently as she reached out and took the heavy box from Jasmine. She fumbled clumsily with the thick silver ribbon. She pulled the lid off and stared down into the box. A strangled, horrific gasp escaped her throat. Inside the box, there were no delicate baby clothes or soft blankets. It was filled with a thick stack of printed poster-sized text messages mounted on rigid foam boards. Jasmine calmly pulled out the first oversized board, holding it up high so the entire room could read the bold black text. The messages were undeniable proof of the ultimate deception. They detailed a long, explicit conversation between Brittany and her sleazy, unemployed ex-boyfriend. The messages clearly outlined their calculated plot to convince Jason that he was the biological father, using his profound desperation for a family to gain access to his money. They discussed exactly how they were going to siphon Jason's money to pay off massive debts to underground loan sharks. One specific message printed in massive font read, "We just need to keep him convinced until the marriage certificate is signed, then we take the accounts and run." Linda let out a piercing shriek, covering her face. Thomas stared at the foam boards with his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. Brittany lunged forward, trying to snatch the boards out of Jasmine's hands, but Jasmine smoothly stepped aside, letting the evidence stand. "You are a monster!" Brittany sobbed hysterically, her fake bump looking utterly ridiculous as she flailed wildly. "You fabricated all of this. You paid someone to type those messages." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom slammed open with a deafening crash. A man walked in, and the entire room collectively gasped. He was loud, unkempt, and completely out of place in the ultra-exclusive country club. He wore a stained leather jacket over a faded concert t-shirt, and his heavy work boots left faint tracks of mud on the pristine white marble. This was the unemployed ex-boyfriend, the biological father of Brittany's twins, and the co-conspirator who had helped her conceal the truth from Jason. Jasmine's private investigator had tracked him down to a cheap motel 3 towns over and offered him a highly lucrative cash incentive to attend the high society baby shower in person today. "Where is my money, Brittany?" the unkempt man yelled, his booming voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. He marched straight into the center of the ballroom, ignoring the horrified stares. "You promised me 50 grand from the rich husband's payout if I kept quiet and let you tell everyone those babies belonged to Jason. The loan sharks are breathing down my neck." The sheer audacity of his arrival delivered the absolute fatal blow to the grand facade. The country club watched in breathless silence. Brittany backed away from her ex-boyfriend, her hands flying to her mouth. She had absolutely no words left to defend herself. The undeniable truth was standing right in front of her, demanding his cut. Kevin stared at the unfolding chaos with profound, unadulterated disgust. His face curled into a deep sneer of revulsion. He looked at Brittany as if she were a piece of garbage rotting on the marble floor. "You people are absolutely repulsive," Kevin stated, his voice dripping with venomous contempt. He turned on his heel and briskly walked out the grand oak doors, completely washing his hands of the toxic family forever. His departure was the final signal. Linda's high society friends let out collective dramatic gasps. They began whispering furiously to one another, gathering their designer handbags. The mass exodus began immediately. The elite guests hurried toward the exit, actively avoiding eye contact with Linda and Thomas. Within moments, the grand ballroom was entirely empty, save for the shattered family, the unkempt ex-boyfriend, and Jasmine. Linda dropped her hands from her face and looked around at the vacant room. Her entire social standing had been utterly decimated in less than 10 minutes. She turned her furious, tear-streaked face toward Jasmine. "Look at what you have done," Linda screamed, her voice raw. "You have destroyed our lives. We have nothing left." Jasmine stood perfectly still amidst the absolute wreckage of her family. She did not raise her voice or show a single ounce of vindictive joy. She simply radiated the cold, untouchable power of a woman who had finally balanced the scales of justice. She slowly turned to face her parents, fixing them with a stare lacking familial affection. "Your house goes into foreclosure on Monday," Jasmine stated clearly, her lethal voice ringing through the cavernous, empty ballroom. "Enjoy the cake." She did not wait for a response. Jasmine turned on her heel, the luxurious fabric of her designer gown flowing gracefully behind her. She walked slowly and purposefully out the grand oak doors, leaving her family screaming furiously at each other amidst the absolute ruins of their social standing. The final blow to Jason's empire did not come with a dramatic explosion, but with the quiet, mechanical sound of packing tape. Federal creditors had descended upon his pristine tech firm shortly after dawn. They systematically stripped the glass-walled offices of everything valuable. Jason stood in the center of the chaos, holding a single cardboard box containing a few personal desk items. His luxury company car had been towed from the executive parking garage 2 days prior. He walked out of the building and hailed a cheap cab to the only place that would take him in. The ride to the modest suburban neighborhood felt like a funeral procession. His tailored suit suddenly felt like a costume he had absolutely no right to wear anymore. He stood on the porch of his childhood home and knocked on the peeling wooden door. Martha opened it. She was a practical, no-nonsense woman who had never approved of Jason's arrogance or his mistreatment of Jasmine. Martha looked at her son standing there with his pathetic cardboard box. She did not offer a warm hug or a comforting cup of coffee. She simply pointed down the narrow hallway toward the basement door. "You can stay down there," Martha stated, her voice devoid of sympathy. "But this is not a free ride, Jason. You will pay me $600 a month in rent. You will do the lawn care and you will clean the dirty gutters this very next weekend." Jason opened his mouth to argue, but his mother cut him off immediately. "You made your bed by treating a good woman like absolute garbage. Now you get to sleep in it. Do not expect me to cater to your bruised ego." Later that evening, Martha sat at her kitchen table sipping chamomile tea and chatting happily on the phone with Jasmine. They warmly discussed their upcoming lunch date, completely ignoring the sounds of Jason dragging his cardboard box down the wooden basement steps. Martha had always liked Jasmine, and she felt absolutely no pity for the son who had foolishly thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to him in his life. Across the city, Brittany stared blankly at the stained yellow wallpaper of her new reality. The tiny one-bedroom apartment smelled faintly of old cooking oil and damp carpet. She sat on the edge of a lumpy thrift store mattress, rubbing her swollen, aching feet. She was wearing a stiff polyester uniform polo shirt from the discount retail store where she now worked the closing shift. In the cramped living room, her sleazy ex-boyfriend lounged on a beat-up sofa, watching television, with the volume turned up too high. He had not bothered to look for a job since moving in with her, demanding she fully provide for him every single day. Brittany closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. Just a few months ago, she had been draped in expensive silk, pretending to be a wealthy socialite carrying twins for a millionaire. Now she was folding cheap sweaters for minimum wage, while her deadbeat partner demanded she buy him beer on her way home from work. Her enabling high society friends had vanished the moment her fraudulent lifestyle was publicly exposed. The wealthy men she used to target would not even look in her direction anymore. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her empty contact list, desperately searching for a wealthy savior again today. There was no one left to call. No one left to manipulate with her practiced vulnerability and fake tears. She was completely trapped in the exact miserable life she had spent her entire existence trying to avoid. She listened to the unkempt man in the other room yelling at a sports game on the television and realized she had locked herself in a prison of her own making. The glamorous future she believed she was entitled to had evaporated, leaving her with nothing but the exhausting reality of manual labor and endless overdue bills pressing down on her fragile shoulders every single day. In the upscale hills of their former neighborhood, Linda and Thomas stood shivering in the driveway of their foreclosed country club mansion. Two heavily armed security guards stood by the grand oak doors, ensuring they did not attempt to go back inside. The bank had seized the property exactly as Jasmine had promised. All of their luxury furniture, imported art, and expensive vehicles had been aggressively liquidated to cover the massive toxic debts they had secretly accumulated. Thomas loaded the last plastic garbage bag of their remaining clothes into the trunk of a rented economy sedan, looking incredibly old and completely broken down now. Linda refused to look at the massive house she had once ruled from. Her face was set in a tight, bitter grimace as she climbed into the passenger seat of the cheap car. They drove in heavy, suffocating silence to the cramped, outdated condo they had been forced to rent on the undesirable side of town. The small unit had scuffed linoleum floors and a tiny kitchen that had not been updated since the 1980s. There was no space for entertaining, no grand dining room to host their elite friends, and no lavish garden to showcase their supposed superiority to the world. A few days later, Linda desperately attempted to maintain a shred of her former dignity. She put on her only remaining designer coat and walked to the premium organic grocery store she had frequented for years. She pushed her metal cart down the brightly lit produce aisle and spotted Susan, an old friend from the country club. Linda plastered on a bright artificial smile and waved eagerly, hoping for a brief moment of normal social interaction. Susan turned her head, locked eyes with Linda for a fraction of a second, and then deliberately turned her back with profound, obvious disgust in her cold eyes. Susan pushed her cart quickly in the opposite direction, acting as if Linda was entirely invisible. Linda stood frozen in the middle of the grocery store. The absolute humiliation washed over her, leaving her gasping for air. The social exile she had always deeply feared was now her permanent reality. She abandoned her shopping cart and hurried out the automatic doors, her face burning with immense shame. She finally realized that the wealth and status she had worshipped her entire life were completely gone forever. Jasmine had not just taken their money, she had permanently dismantled the very foundation of their extreme arrogance. Exactly 365 days had passed since the heavy oak doors of that country club had closed permanently behind me. The crisp evening breeze swept across the sprawling terrace of my luxury penthouse, carrying the distant rhythmic sounds of the vibrant city below. I stood near the edge of the glass railing, allowing the cool air to brush against my skin. The glittering skyline of the downtown financial district stretched out endlessly in front of me, a magnificent sea of glowing lights and towering steel structures. It was a breathtaking view that I had grown to love deeply over the past year. Behind me, the expansive open-concept living area of my home was filled with the soft, elegant melody of a live jazz trio and the warm hum of genuine, joyful conversation. Tonight, I was not sitting alone in a quiet suburban house waiting for a husband who would never appreciate me. I was hosting a highly exclusive charity gala specifically designed to fund and mentor ambitious women entrepreneurs. The penthouse was illuminated by the soft golden glow of custom chandeliers casting a warm and inviting light over the gathered guests. There were no fake ice sculptures or towering ostentatious floral arrangements paid for with leveraged credit. Instead, the room was decorated with understated elegance, featuring delicate arrangements of fresh white lilies and modern local art that I had carefully curated myself. The women filling my home were brilliant, innovative, and fiercely driven. They were chief executive officers, brilliant software developers, visionary artists, and determined founders of their own companies. As I turned to look back inside, I saw genuine smiles and heard the authentic sound of women supporting one another. They were sharing strategies, exchanging valuable industry contacts, and celebrating their hard-earned victories without a single ounce of toxic competition. This was the vibrant, unshakable world I had built for myself, and I felt a profound sense of peace washing over my entire being. I slowly walked back through the sliding glass doors, stepping into the main reception area. A young woman named Clara approached me, holding a modest glass of sparkling water. She was a brilliant software engineer whose technology startup my firm had recently chosen to back. Her eyes were bright with genuine gratitude as she reached out to gently touch my arm. "Jasmine," she said, her voice filled with sincere emotion. "I just wanted to thank you again. Your mentorship and the funding from your firm have completely changed the trajectory of my entire life. My team finally secured our office space yesterday, and we are officially launching our new platform next month. I could not have done this without your guidance and your belief in my vision." I smiled at Clara, feeling a deep, authentic warmth radiating through my chest. "You did the hard work, Clara," I replied softly, maintaining steady eye contact. "I simply provided the resources you needed to let your brilliance shine. You earned every bit of your success, and I am incredibly proud to be part of your journey." She hugged me tightly, a gesture of pure, honest connection that stood in stark contrast to the hollow, strategic embraces I had endured for a decade with my former family. As Clara walked away to join a group of fellow tech founders, I accepted a crystal flute of vintage champagne from a passing waiter and continued my slow stroll through the crowded room. Every conversation I engaged in tonight was grounded in mutual respect and shared ambition. There were no hidden agendas, no manipulative whispers, and absolutely no desperate attempts to maintain a fabricated social facade. I was completely surrounded by people who valued my intellect, my work ethic, and my unyielding integrity. They did not care about the designer labels on my custom-tailored emerald green evening gown or the square footage of my penthouse. They cared about the impact we were making in the world together. The toxic, exhausting weight of my past had been entirely lifted from my shoulders, leaving behind a woman who was fully emotionally healed and unapologetically free. I found myself naturally gravitating back toward the quiet sanctuary of the outdoor balcony. I stepped out into the crisp night air once again, leaving the vibrant energy of the charity gala behind the thick, soundproof glass doors. I walked over to the far corner of the terrace, where the view of the city was entirely unobstructed. I rested my hand against the cool metal of the railing and took a slow, deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. My mind briefly drifted to the people who had once consumed my entire existence. I thought about Jason trapped in his mother's cramped basement, stripped of his unearned arrogance and his flashy sports cars. I thought about Brittany folding cheap clothes in a discount retail store chained to a man who drained her meager wages. I thought about Linda and Thomas hiding in their tiny, outdated condo, permanently exiled from the high society circles they had worshipped so desperately. They were all trapped in prisons constructed entirely of their own lies and insatiable greed. For 10 long years, they had treated me like a disposable convenience, a quiet background character whose sole purpose was to facilitate their grand illusions. They had underestimated my intelligence, ignored my contributions, and ultimately tried to discard me the second they believed they had secured a more lucrative future. But their profound ignorance had been their ultimate undoing. I had not needed to scream or fight or beg for my humanity to be recognized. I had simply gathered the undeniable facts, illuminated the truth, and allowed their own behavior to dismantle their miserable lives. I lifted my glass higher, feeling perfectly at peace under the vast sky. Because true power is not just about destroying your enemies, it is about building an unshakable, beautiful life that they can no longer ever hope to reach out or touch. For 10 years, Jasmine believed that protecting the people she loved was the same thing as loving them. She absorbed their insults, concealed Jason's medical truth, and quietly repaired the financial damage caused by everyone around her. But loyalty without boundaries did not make her family kinder. It only taught them that they could hurt her without consequence. Jason believed her silence meant weakness. Brittany believed Jasmine's modest lifestyle meant she lacked ambition. Linda and Thomas believed the daughter they had ignored would always return the moment they demanded her help. They were all wrong. Jasmine did not win because she screamed louder or became more cruel than the people who betrayed her. She won because she prepared carefully, understood the truth, and refused to continue financing the lies that were destroying her life. The most important decision she made was not transferring her assets or adding a liability clause to the divorce agreement. It was deciding that she no longer needed the approval of people who only valued her when she was useful to them. Her success did not erase the pain of losing a husband, a sister, and 2 parents at the same time, but it gave her the freedom to build relationships based on respect instead of obligation. 1 year later, Jasmine was not celebrating their suffering. She was celebrating the life she had created after finally walking away. That is the real difference between revenge and accountability. Revenge keeps you emotionally tied to the people who harmed you. Accountability allows their choices to produce their own consequences while you move forward without them. Jason lost everything because he signed documents he refused to understand. Brittany lost her status because she built it on deception. Linda and Thomas lost their home because they repeatedly sacrificed financial stability to protect appearances. Jasmine did not create those flaws. She simply stopped shielding them from the results. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal is not a public argument. It is a clear boundary, a closed door, and a future so peaceful that the people who underestimated you no longer have the power to disturb it. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who only valued you when they needed something? Share your experience in the comments. And if Jasmine's story reminded you that quiet strength can be more powerful than anger, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and return for our next story about betrayal, resilience, and the moment an underestimated person finally takes back control of their life.